very good morning to everyone joining us this morning at the World Press Freedom Day Virtual Forum 2022, co-organized by the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, the United Nations in Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam, and Center for Independent Journalism. The 2022 global theme is Journalism Under Digital Siege. The digital space over the last 2 decades has evolved in leaps and bounds. It has brought humanity many benefits, from ease in access of information, creating a more borderless world, but also challenges and threats, such as disinformation and hate speech. The evolution of the digital space has also impacted journalism and journalists. And today, our speakers will be discussing the important issues regarding the digital siege. To kick off today's session, let us invite Ms. Karima El-Khoury, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam, to deliver the welcoming address.
Good morning. YB Tan Sri Datuk Sri Panglima Haji Anwar Haji Musa, Minister of Communications and Multimedia, represented today by Puan Mastura Ahmad Mustafa, Deputy Secretary General, YB Datuk Sri Dr. Haji Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jafar, Minister in the Prime Minister's Department for Parliament and Law, His Excellency Art Jacobi, Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Malaysia, Ms. Wasla Naidu, Executive Director, Center for Independent Journalism, distinguished speakers and participants, a very good morning and selamat pagi to all. It is a genuine honor for me to deliver these welcoming remarks to Malaysia's World Press Freedom Day Virtual Forum for 2022, organized jointly with the Embassy of the Netherlands and the CIJ. Thank you, Your Excellency, for the continued partnership. Every year since 1993, the UN has celebrated World Press Freedom Day on the 3rd of May to recognize and promote the fundamental principles set out in the Windhoek Declaration. We take this annual opportunity to defend the media from attacks on their independence and pay tribute to the bravery of journalists in exercise of their profession. National gatherings like today's event are convened specifically to highlight the vital role of a domestic free press in delivering transparency and holding those in power to account. This role is sacrosanct in a vibrant, multi-party, modern democracy like Malaysia today. While there can be no doubt that we live in interesting times, we also live in challenging ones. Threats to press freedom continue to emerge from a variety of sources, and the resilience of the press will likely come under pressure as Malaysia moves closer to national elections. We need also to recognize that as many countries, the full realization of press freedoms in Malaysia remains a work in progress. I want therefore to commend the Honorable Prime Minister of Malaysia, Datuk Sri Ismail Sabri Yaakob, announcement during last week's National Journalists' Day in the government that the government would never interfere with the media in executing their duties. In the light of this statement and adoption by media organizations of the Malacca Declaration 2022 on preserving and elevating the dignity of journalism, the UN urges government to continue to review the legal and regulatory environment to ensure the right to information. I now come to the global theme of World Press Freedom Day, that of journalism under digital siege, and specifically the impacts of the digital era on freedom of expression, access to accurate information, surveillance, and personal privacy. The global advance of digital platforms and communications has impacted each and every facet of our lives. This has brought many benefits, but also severe challenges. We as global netizens now have access to an unprecedented volume of information in real time from every corner of the globe and from multiple sources. As UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres has noted, digital technology has democratized access to information and empowered all manner of previously excluded groups. Yet, problematically, as he also notes, this has brought forth a host of challenges. Chief among them are a growing lack of reliability and accuracy, and inevitably a decline in evidence-based reporting, which has led to epidemic of bias and, in some cases, hate speech. In turn, these have fed widespread skepticism and mistrust in all types of media. These developments have been characterized as a digital siege faced by journalism today. Misinformation in the digital space reached a peak during the pandemic. The drip feed of fake news and false narratives drove mass fears and misinterpretations and misperceptions. It compromised essential public health messages and led to scapegoating and the stigmatization of marginal and excluded groups. For example, we all witnessed the blaming of migrant and undocumented populations for the spread of infections. Digital technology is also susceptible to manipulation by political and vested interests, including external powers. It has, in some circumstances, facilitated rather than curbed censorship. In extremis, it has unfairly swayed public opinion and enabled the creation of new channels of oppression and abuse. While many commentators at the dawn of the digital age foretold the death of traditional media, professional journalism has increasingly become a bulwark against these troubling developments. In the post-internet era, the formal media's role as a check and balance in democratic societies has never been more important. Accountability and professionalism are key. Mainstream outlets, bound by codes of conduct and a commitment to evidential sourcing, are playing a dual role of reporting without fear or favor, and in dispelling a potential torrent of disinformation. Regulatory responses to tackling menace of misinformation are highly challenging and open to claims of manipulation and censorship. Nevertheless, in addition to supporting a free and accountable media, the UN recognizes that there is some role for regulation and stakeholder engagement to combat the nefarious use of digital space. Yet, regulatory powers must be exercised sensitively and with due regard to the proper exercise of the freedom of expression. Distinguished audience, I want to make clear that the direct connections between press freedom and the realization of human rights and Malaysia's wider development objectives are core, and more specifically, the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. A free media is both an enabling agent for the entire development framework and explicitly is recognized in Global Goal 16, Target 1610, about ensuring public access to information and protecting fundamental freedoms. As a primary provider of reliable information and for all its weaknesses, a free, independent and pluralist press provides the public with vital knowledge. It contributes to education, enables discussion of controversial issues, gives voice to the powerless, and promotes the resolution of tensions via constructive dialogue. It also has the potential of rooting out racism and xenophobia. Therefore, a free but also responsible and accountable media that harnesses digital platforms can help drive efficient and inclusive development precisely by facilitating a more vibrant democracy. Reporting on issues such as the environment, corruption, those left behind, makes government and other actors more responsive and more accountable. This would be further complemented by the adoption of freedom of information legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to end by reiterating that while digitalization provides many pathways to reimagine the media landscape, there are genuine challenges to be addressed. The key remains the maintenance of a free but accountable and professional press alongside smart regulation that effectively combats egregious misinformation. On a final note, I want, on behalf of the United Nations in Malaysia, to express our recognition to journalists in and around Malaysia for the contribution you make. This includes those who are here with us today, speakers, those attending online, and those currently out there searching for the truth. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. El-Khoury. Next, for the keynote address, please welcome His Excellency Art Jacobi, the Ambassador of the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands.
Karima, Deputy Secretary General of the Ministry of Communication, distinguished guests, it's a pleasure to be with all you here today on the Press Freedom Day. It's the second year, I think, that we, as Netherlands Embassy, participate in this event. And I must say that freedom of the press is an issue that is close to my heart. I do not exaggerate if I state that I am passionate about freedom of the press. There's a few items that I would like to touch upon with you. First is the role of the press in a vibrant democracy. The second one is the press and its role in proper functioning of a society. Then maybe a few remarks on the digital siege that the press is under, and then I may conclude with a few suggestions. Don't worry, this should not take more than about 5 minutes. Well, first of all, the role of a free press in a democracy. What should it do? What is its task? For a democracy to function, the press can be a bridge between the government on one side and the population, the electorate, on the other side. It controls one and it informs the other. And if it does so properly, then the population knows what the government is doing, can judge its government, and they can also decide when it is election time to send the government home. This has happened in Malaysia, as we know, in 2018, when the scale of the 1MDB affair became apparent. The electorate chose to say goodbye to the then government, and another government came to power. This is normal. This is as it should be in a functioning democracy. And Malaysia should be proud of itself that it is and that it has a functioning democracy. But a free press is essential and is crucial for this process to work properly. But it's not just free press and politics. A free press is also necessary for a proper functioning of society. Subjects such as immigration, education, defense, international relations, all these are reported upon by the press. And if the public is not properly informed, then probably improvement in this area will also be stalled. So there too, the press has an important role in the functioning of society and to promote progress in the society. Then the digital siege. As Karima has mentioned, the scenery of the press has changed enormously. In 2014, the circulation of papers was 6.8 million in Malaysia. At present, it is 618,000. So it has diminished by 90%. That means that the large part of the population now gets its information digitally. This has certain advantages, and Karima, you already touched upon it. The advantage is that the news is immediate. The reach of it is enormous. Everybody has a mobile phone, and that means that news is within your reach. But it also comes with many dangers, so accurately pointed out by you. There is an abundance of fake news. Anybody can put anything on the internet. And I guess that the best way to arm oneself against fake news and how to distinguish between what is right and what might be fake is to have a very well educated population. And then we just have to hope that they can make the distinction, but education in that respect is crucial. So yes, there is an advantage to digital news. It is immediate, it is direct, it has an enormous reach. But there is also one danger that I would like to point out and that has become apparent lately. The providers of news, the vehicles that bring us the news, let's take for instance Facebook. They use algorithms, and the algorithm will decide what you get to read. Now, I like soccer, and I admire Messi. So if I want to see articles on soccer and Messi, then I will be fed by the internet uniquely and only Messi, soccer, nothing else. If I were to be anti-Trump, then I would be fed articles that are uniquely anti-Trump or pro, whatever you are. And the danger is that you become like living in a bubble, which only feeds you news that you seem to want to read, and that you are not open anymore to other opinions. That can cause splits in society of people who are hardly able to talk with one another. This also happened in the Netherlands when we had vaccination campaigns. The anti-vaxxers and the pro-vaxxers, I mean, the division was enormous, and actually the animosity was fed by the internet to a large extent. So yes, it has its benefits, but it also has its dangers. But I think that we will touch upon these issues later on during the seminar. And then my final point, suggestions. This is the most touchy one, I must confess, but Malaysia tumbled from 101 to 119 on the World Press Freedom Index. Some say this was because of the emergency law that was introduced. That may indeed have had a certain effect. Personally, I feel that 119 actually looks worse than it actually is. Malaysia is not a country where the press is completely muzzled. That is definitely not true. A lot is possible. So that's the good thing. But on the other hand, there's also a lot that can be improved. And my suggestion would be to take a look at a number of the laws that are still on the books. You also mentioned it, Karima. But we have the law, for instance, on the Secrets Act. That is one. Then we have sedition. The Sedition Act goes back to 1948. Maybe at that time, sedition was a serious issue. You know, it was a nation that was about to be born in 1948, but now we are 75 years later. So my suggestion would be that a review of that act would probably be a good idea. We have the Communications and Multimedia Act, yet another one, and the Printing Press Publication Act. So I think those four actually open the door for the government to be more strict than Malaysia deserves. I think that it would be good if a review of these laws were to be undertaken, and it would definitely help to make Malaysia come back from 119 to somewhat in the 80s, I don't know. But that would be great, I think. So that would be my suggestion, and that's where I would like to end my presentation. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for highlighting the importance of press freedom in the country. So to officiate today's forum, let us hear from Yang Berhormat Tan Sri Datuk Seri Panglima Haji Anwar Haji Musa, the Minister of Communications and Multimedia Malaysia, represented by the Deputy Secretary General.
Thank you. First of all, I would like to convey regards from my Minister, Yang Berhormat Tan Sri Datuk Seri Panglima Tuan Planner Anwar bin Haji Musa. He really wants to be here today, but unfortunately Wednesday morning is actually Cabinet Day, so he has to be in Putrajaya. So without much ado, let me read his speech. Your Excellency, Karima El Khoury, UN Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore and Brunei Darussalam. Okay, let me take up my mask. Okay. His Excellency Jacobi, Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. Distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Salam sejahtera, salam keluarga Malaysia. First and foremost, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to the 2022 World Press Freedom Day Virtual Forum. It is great to be a part of this meaningful event, and I am honored. The digitalization transformation has changed the way journalists work, the methods of how information is disseminated, and the way events are reported. It has forced all types of media to reinvent themselves in ways we never thought would have been possible just 20 years ago. We have to accept the fact that digitalization of the media industry is driven by changing consumer behavior and expectations, especially among the young who demand everything to be at their fingertips here and now. That said, the digital transformation in many ways reinvented the survival economics of media as compared to how conservative media kept itself afloat financially. It definitely reshaped the relationship of the media with its audience. The media has had to contend all this and yet deal with the decrease in public trust as the digital transformation threw open all doors. Media practitioners have had to compete with the bloggers, vloggers, influencers, and many others. Media practitioners will agree with me that digitalization has challenged the journalism code of ethics continuously. Do we put out there now before getting all sides of the story? Do we repeat what the others said without verification? If we don't publish it now, would we miss out our readers and viewers? Is it ethical to write a story based on WhatsApp text? Was the picture sent Photoshop? Shall we still put it up? Would it be morally right? These are questions continuously asked by ethical media practitioners. We at the Communications and Multimedia Ministry of Malaysia understand the challenges facing media practitioners, and we are completely hands-on in trying to ensure media upholds the ethics. In the development of the increasingly sophisticated digital era, Malaysia is no exception to being a victim of increased misinformation and disinformation. However, it is not a new phenomenon, only that now it comes in forms invisible to us all, and they are more subtle and, to mention, more dangerous. The COVID-19 pandemic created an environment where all of us had no choice but to go digital in a virtual world, brought to a standstill in our efforts to contain the virus. There was much misinformation in the forms of fake news and distorted information during the height of the pandemic, which was difficult to contain as the digital world is a borderless world. The domino effects of the COVID-19 pandemic has auspiciously baffled governments and stakeholders on managing public panic emerging from consumerism in the news, particularly through digital media. The social media infodemic significantly spread panic and fear during the tumultuous time and affected the vast users' mental health of looming social media users. Taking this into consideration, the Malaysian government issued the Emergency Essential Power No. 2 Ordinance 2021 to deal with the fake news on the economy, security, and public order. The advent of digital media has brought new challenges and opportunities. It has flattened the hierarchies of communication and reshaped the relationship between the authorities and wider public in society. Increased misinformations need to be addressed. The existence of fake news in the medium of communication will restrict the community from communicating and reduce the community's ability to engage in productive discourse. The Malaysian government has implemented multiple efforts that enable Malaysians to distinguish false information from fake news and verify any information they come across. Sebenarnya.my was set up by the Malaysian government in 2017 as a fact-checking website run by the Malaysian Communications and Multimedia Commission, or popularly known as MCMC. This initiative was created as a reliable government source for the public to verify information they receive via their screens. With so many challenges facing the media, be the honors of practitioners, I am sure this World Press Freedom Day 2020 conference on journalism under digital siege will provide an opportunity to discuss these complex challenges and to also highlight the ways in which the media have adapted and can further adapt to the new reality. The conference will also enable to put into action the commitments made by all 193 UNESCO member states through the Windhike Plus 30 Declaration, which recognizes free, independent, professional, and pluralistic media as the prerequisite to guaranteeing information as a public good for the whole of humanity. Last but not least, Malaysia is committed to uphold its federal constitution, which states that Malaysians have the right to enjoy the freedom of speech and expression as stated in the Article 10, but as long as the freedom does not encroach national security, public order, ethics or morality as stated in Article 10(2). I thank once again the co-organizers of the forum, the Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands, the United Nations in Malaysia through the Peace Resort Group, and the Center for Independent Journalism. May this forum be a fruit one. Thank you. Terima kasih.
Thank you, Puan Mastura, for delivering the speech. We will now have the keynote delivered by Mr. Muhammad Jalid, the Director of UNESCO Regional Science Bureau for Asia and the Pacific and representative to Brunei Darussalam, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, and Timor-Leste.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Yang berhormat Tan Sri Datuk Seri Panglima Anwar Haji Musa, Minister of Communication and Multimedia. Yang berhormat Datuk Seri Dr. Haji Wan Junaidi Tuanku Jaafar, Minister in the Prime Minister Department of Parliament and Law. His Excellency R. Jacobi, the Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands to Malaysia. Mrs. Karima Al-Khoury, UN Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam, Executive Director of the Center for Independent Journalism, Washla Naidu, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for being with us today to celebrate the World Press Freedom Day in Malaysia. Let me first express special thanks to the Kingdom of Netherlands, to Malaysia, the Center for Independent Journalism, and the UN Resident Coordinator Office for making this event possible. As you may know, UNESCO initiated the World Press Freedom Day back in 1993 to keep press freedom on the international agenda. It's a day to celebrate the fundamental principle of freedom of expression and to reflect on the existing challenges for public interest media. To have a functioning democracy, we need a media that is free, independent, professional, and diverse. We need is not only to hold those in power accountable, but also to make sense of the world and of our role in it. The United Nations marks the 10th anniversary of its plan of action on the safety of journalists and the issue of impunity, which UNESCO is proud to lead. Journalists are facing a fast evolving environment. Indeed, today public interest media is facing an existential threat, which at the same time is an opportunity. Digital technology are further revolutioning this landscape. They have permitted unprecedented exchange of information, supporting journalism across borders. Now we can see what's happened in any corner of the world at any time, but these opportunities come with new challenges. This tweet is perfectly encapsulated in the theme of this year's World Press Freedom Day, Journalism Under Digital Siege. The digital technology has facilitated new forms of harassment and attack against journalists, such as targeted surveillance, hacking, and doxing. The rise of social media platforms have in turn facilitated the spread of unverified and often harmful content, affecting voting decisions and the relations between different social groups. Technological advances need to be underpinned by respect for the freedom, privacy, and safety of journalists. Social media networks must especially do more to tackle rampant disinformation and hate speech while protecting freedom of expression. UNESCO is firmly committed to these goals. Ladies and gentlemen, with the upcoming general election in Malaysia in 2023, these issues are as pressing as ever, from online harassment of journalists to the economic crisis of new media to the spread of hate speech and disinformation. This is certainly no one-size-fits-for-all solutions, but we need all stakeholders present here today, media, civil society, government, and technology companies, to chart a viable path forward. Before concluding, let me quote the message of Andre Azoulay, Director General of UNESCO, on the occasion of World Press Freedom Day. We all must do more to address the risks and seize the opportunities of digital age. On this World Press Freedom Day, I invite member states, technology companies, the media communities, as well as the rest of civil society to come together to develop a new digital configuration, one that protects both journalists and journalists. With this, I wish you perfect deliberation in today's forum. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you, Mr. Jalid. Ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a few minutes break to prepare for the first panel discussion. So please stay with us and we'll see you very soon. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. So today we'll start the first panel discussion titled Challenges to a Digital Siege to Media Freedom with our first panel. Now the moderator for this panel will be Ms. Washla Naidu. She is the Executive Director of the Center for Independent Journalism. She has more than 20 years of experience in human rights, having worked globally and nationally with UN agencies and other human rights NGOs. So, Ms. Washla, over to you.
A very good morning to everyone, our distinguished guests, our speakers here today. For those who've been following the program very closely, you'll realize that I am not Zoraili. Unfortunately, Zoraili is taken ill and I've stepped in as a moderator today. And thank you very much for the introduction this morning. I think especially Ambassador Jacobi has very rightly contextualized Malaysia within a broader global spaces for media freedom. And yes, we are not faring very badly compared to all the killings that's going on out there, regards to recent killings of journalists. We've also, globally know that there are enforced disappearances and extensive crackdown of media. But in the context of Malaysia, we are faced with rapidly advancing digital landscape. These, as well as increasing infrastructure that is bridging the digital divide here in Malaysia. In that context, obviously, we are also battling with various threats in the digital spaces. I don't need to go through it. I think this morning we've heard a series of possible threats that we are facing, the experiences we are facing. And as we continue to advance, we realize that we need to tackle not just the economic viability of media, but economic viability and sustainability of media dependent on these continuing challenges. Now, these challenges are not just within the digital landscape, but they're often intersected within our legal framework in the country. The continuing, how would I say, need to reform and review our various laws that restrict and hampers our freedom of expression. Now, in that context, I would like to introduce our panel today. We have an esteemed panel of representing different stakeholders who will be sharing with us their own perspective on the challenges, as well as specific measures that has been put in place, as well as measures that are required as we deal with this era of technology and new media. First off, together with us today is Puan Mastura Ahmad Mustafa, who's been the Deputy Secretary General of Strategic, part of the Ministry of Communications and Multimedia since July 2021. Puan Mastura is responsible to provide guidance and oversee the operations of the Strategic Communications Division, as well as the related departments and agencies under the ministry. I think it's really appropriate that we have Puan Mastura here because she's also dealing with the Department of Information, Department of Broadcasting, and Bernama. Yep. Next, we have with us Ms. Madiha Mahmood, who's the Executive Director of the Content Forum, Communications and Multimedia Content Forum of Malaysia. Now, Ms. Madiha holds a law degree from the International Islamic University of Malaysia. I think we have that in common. I was also with ICOL. And Ms. Madiha, of course, started off as a legal practitioner, and she has more than 15 years of cumulative experience in both legal and regulatory spaces, right? Ms. Madiha is adept at regulatory policy and stakeholder engagement, and we are very happy to have her here because she's just been appointed as the Executive Director of the Content Forum effective February 2021. Yep. And we have with us, of course, Radzi Razak, who is representing Gerakan Media Merdeka, an organization he himself co-founded in 2014. Razi is a dedicated journalist with over a decade of experience in online, print, and broadcast media. He is a strong advocate for media freedom in Malaysia. He's been very active within the spaces. There's actually also a representative of the Pro-Tem Committee that was set up in 2020 to establish the Malaysian Media Council. Now, we're very pleased to have this panel with us and quite excited, to also take questions later on from the audience. Christine will be helping me with the questions. Now, Puan Mastura, let's start with you. I was quite excited to hear you reading out the minister's statement earlier, and as also committed by the minister and the prime minister at the Hari Wartawan National, Malaysia and the government is committed to promoting media freedom. Yeah. In Malaysia, we have almost 30 million internet users, and that's a huge number given our population, right? And of course, with the changing digital landscape and related challenges, we are very interested to hear what the government considers as top risk, yeah? And top risks that would inhibit media freedom in Malaysia, and relatedly, what are the government's commitments and measures towards promoting media freedom in Malaysia, especially with respect to law and policy reforms?
Yeah. Thank you, Wasala. It's so nice to meet you again. But before this, you are actually an equal chair as me, as the panelist. Now you are the moderator, and you have chosen me as the first speaker. Okay, all right. I think everybody agree that the top risk that we are facing now is the widespread of fake news. So definitely that is the main things that government needs to address at this digital era. And like many other countries, actually, we have to find ways to address the rise of misinformation and disinformation. So, especially when during a pandemic, it is strongly important to ensuring that the public health remain the top priority of the government's agenda. And we have to make sure that the fake news or misinformation will create unrest among the society. So, but at the same time, we know that the public too must be equipped with accurate and timely information. With the digital era, time is very crucial. If we take time to verify the information, providing the facts, if the wrong information came up first, then that's it for the government. It will be more difficult to actually address the issue when it's already widespread. And during that time, that frame of time, we are also moving towards being an increasingly digital, mobile, and social media environment with intense competition for attention from the many medium of access. Because, as you mentioned, under the ministry, we have Jabatan Penerangan, that is Department of Information. We have Jabatan Penyiaran, that is RTM, as well as Bernama, which mostly are more using the conventional way of distributing information. So we need to do a real change to make sure that we are at par with the digital era. What we see is as the pandemic spread, actually so did a new disease of media and communication known as the infodemic. The rapid influx of information containing various forms of false news has caused a state of panic among the general public. In our federal constitution, the freedom of speech and expression is an ethical and matured manner is an important fundamental principle in society and in the practice of democracy in a country. Actually, all individuals are free to express themselves within the legal constraints and limitations so as to avoid inciting hatred and violence and triggering social unrest. Effective communication is about understanding the intention underlying the information.
Actually, today, when conveying a message, we also need to listen in a way that gains the full meaning of what is being said and make the other person feel heard and understood. Therefore, the ministry has undertaken efforts to make communication more efficient in order to lessen the impact of misinformation and disinformation. Firstly, actually, we have this what we call strategic social media collaboration with all the ministry. So this is actually used to encourage the citizen to connect and actively participate with the government, because social media by definition revolves around interactions and conversation. Secondly, by focus on engagement, there is a shift in communication approaches. Particularly, we are actually moving away from the traditional tell and sell model to a more participatory and inclusive approach to fostering meaningful two-way communication and engagement. Thirdly, we actually minimizing the digital divide. The government is committed to ensure that all sectors of the population have equal access to media. So we don't want only a certain sector or certain group of people have access to this information through media, digital media. Fourth, through the Info of Wheels programs. This is under the Jabatan Penerangan. The program is effort to disseminate factual information to the public about a particular issue by going down to the ground and explaining it to the people face to face. The program is conducted in places frequented by people at villages, night markets, farmers market and supermarkets regularly. And lastly, this is the most important part, I think, even His Excellency mentioned about it, through periodic reviews of existing laws. So we have these laws under the Penal Code Act 574, the Communication and Multimedia Act 1998. So we are actually doing it continuously to ensure that the provisions of the law continue to remain relevant in the light of current trends. In this regard, I would also like to highlight that the Communication and Multimedia Act 1998, which is under our ministry, is currently undergoing a review process where the ministry has held several consultative engagements with different stakeholders in examining the suitability of the provisions under the Act, in ensuring the safety of the public in engaging through online platform, while ensuring that it does not stifle the rights of citizens to enjoy their freedom of speech and expressions. Another example that I would like to highlight is the issuance of the Emergency Essential Power No. 2 Ordinance 2021, which has been promulgated by the Yang di-Pertuan Agong on 11 March 2021 to guarantee and preserve the security, economic life and public order of the nation during the COVID-19 pandemic. From the onset, the intention actually to use only for specific time and situation to curb the widespread sharing of fake and misleading information regarding COVID-19, or consequently various treatment and vaccine policies, so that it does not cause alarm or distress in the general society. Definitely it is not to curb freedom of speech. Once this situation has improved, actually the critical need, because we are no longer need the emergency ordinance, the Dewan Negara unanimously approved the motion to revoke the Emergency Essential Power No. 2 Ordinance. And I would also like to address here, despite having various laws and regulations, if you look at the statistic, actually the number of cases taken against the journalists is very rare and very minimal. So even though people say that we have certain laws and regulations which actually limit the freedom of speech, but actually in reality the enforcement of it is not really high. And definitely I don't think the journalists in Malaysia feels that their freedom has been impeached. Lastly, We also working together with the social media platform providers in reducing the spread of false news, where we will remove fake accounts and false news. So while we want people to be connected, we are also working together for the same mission, that is to make the internet a safe place. So I think that's all for me. A bit long, but I'm trying to explain from the government perspective on this freedom of speech.
Thank you very much,
Yeah.
Puan Mastura, especially for setting the scene in terms of what the government, in this case the Ministry of Communications and Multimedia, is doing. And I really hope that the use of these laws will continue to remain minimal and only invoked in exceptional circumstances. And again, thank you very much for also confirming that there would be a review of the Communications and Multimedia Act as well as Section 574 of the Penal Code. And in that context, we also hope the ministry will work with all the other ministries in terms of reviewing other laws which would have an implication on media freedom, particularly Printing Presses and Publications Act, Sedition Act, Official Secrets Act, as well as other penal code provisions, Section 203A, which restricts public officers from divulging or disseminating information. I think that is very, very critical as well, amongst others. Yeah. Now, taking the conversation in terms of laws and standards, perhaps Puan Medina, you could share with us the role of Content Forum and how can the Content Forum be optimized in strengthening digital spaces as we continue to navigate, challenges faced by disinformation, online gender-based violence, as well as hate speech, toxic narrative. I mean, we can go on, but Content Forum has a unique role here, and how can we optimize this?
Thank you, Washla. I think one of the first things I would like to commend Puan Mastura for highlighting is the fact that, yes, engagement with people, dialogue on these topics, that's essentially what the Content Forum strives for. Because we have to look at the fact that right now we've got content consumers in the content ecosystem. We've got a group of people who still wait for the 8 o'clock news, sit in front of the TV to wait for the news. We also have a group of people who don't even own a TV in their house. So we've got a range of consumers, the way they consume content, the way they consume news is very different. And having guidelines or laws or practices which need to be adaptable to all these groups of people, we need to engage with them to recognize exactly what their desires are, what their needs are, how they consume content, and on which platform. We always talk about social media platforms. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, people consume content on social media platforms. But the people who consume it on Facebook is vastly different from the people who consume it on TikTok. We've got generations right now who have never seen the evening news, but get their news from TikTok, and then from WhatsApp forwards, etc. So how do we ensure that fake news is dealt with on all these platforms? And what the Content Forum does is that we advocate for self-regulation, meaning that from the content producer to the content consumer, to the regulators, to everyone out there in the content ecosystem, we have best practices and standards that we look for in the content code, and that is the level of the standard that we need to comply with or abide by. And what the Content Forum does is we recognize the fact that content evolves very rapidly. It's not just the way we consume content, but the kind of content that's being consumed. When I was 12 or 11, I wouldn't be bothered with the news. But I've got an 11-year-old son who knows more about the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial than I do. And it's because he consumes content on these platforms which pushes these news. And like His Excellency mentioned, a lot of it also has to do with the algorithms of each platform. So it can be a bit worrying if you think about it, that what kind of bubble are my sons in? In fact, I even worry of what kind of bubble are my parents in, because it's not an age thing, it's a content consumption thing. So the Content Forum, we really want to engage, we really try to engage with as many people as possible, from the government agencies to members of the public, to teenagers, to students in institutions of higher learning, to other self-regulatory organizations, because not only do we want to know what are the best practices out there, we need to know what are the best practices in different segments of the content ecosystem, and how do we address that. And I think how we can strengthen it, as your question, Washla, is typically what I would say is we need better engagement to a bigger, wider audience. We've got excellent members right now in the content forum, from the broadcasters, advertisers, content creators, and institutions of higher learnings. But if we could get digital players involved as well, then we would probably benefit from the insider insights that they might have on their platforms. Like, for example, Puan Mastura was saying that there's a revision of the the Communications and Multimedia Act, and then this consultation on various stakeholders. It's the same thing that we do for the content code. I think, Washa, you're probably aware we had this whole revamp of the content code, and we did a nationwide public consultation. There were so many things that we ourselves were not particularly aware of that we became aware of during that process. For example, ethical reporting of suicide news. That was not addressed. There was a policy gap in the content code. So when we had feedback for that, that it was our prerogative to actually do some research on that and see how we can improve the provisions in the content code to address this problem. So I think to further strengthen the digital space, then we need to have better engagement, better conversations with the digital players out there, so we know exactly what the challenges they face, and we can help to lay down the tiles for making things a lot easier for them and beneficial to us all as a whole.
Thank you very much, Madiha. Radzi, taking on the fact that you are with Millennial, who's gone digital as well. You're also with Garam, but as media, as journalists, obviously, Madiha also talked about echo chambers, filter bubbles. Algorithms play a huge role, right? And on top of that, we have news aggregators, all of them impacting the digital spaces, as well as information integrity, because we don't know now, what's really at times the real source of information, right? In that context, then, how do you see the impact of algorithm news aggregation on media in Malaysia?
Okay, thank you, Asra. So I think it changes the game completely from when I started about 40, 50 years ago. There was really completely different game. So now you have to fight the algorithm or to go in for the algorithm. You have to cover more news, and you have less manpower. You don't have beats anymore. I think we used to have crime beats, political beats, general beats, and now one journalist will have to do 3-4 beats because of lack of manpower, and then it really turns the industry around and makes stuff harder. And with the aggregators who didn't even go out to get the news, they just take the news from legit news portal or newspaper, and then they just create content based on that, and then the problem stretched far. They took the pictures, don't even give credits. So it really changes all the way the news station operates over the years. And I think we have this interesting development over the world where several countries have tried to charge the Facebook and Google in order to gain more power and to get back the authority of the problem.
Yeah. Thank you, Razi. A follow-up question on that. As media continue to adapt, not just to the algorithm, but also in terms of time, right? You are literally battling for time. Before, in the past, this print media, it takes a while, getting all the copyright done, the design done, and then the next day you perhaps get the news, right? But now, within seconds, minutes, it's out there on digital spaces, especially with the advent of social media. So, in terms of timing, right, how can we avoid sensationalization? How can we continue to promote ethical and responsible reporting? And how really is the media able to contend and effectively deal with this context?
I think the best way to do it is the journalists themselves have to have that, because we all prescribe to the journalism ethics. So it is themselves who needs to empower themselves to be able to do that. I mean, the timing is important. I mean, we have these updates coming. For example, the flood cases. So everyone is getting news because there's so many places happening at once. So you have to get the facts straight, get the fact what is happening. There's a death. And then there's a danger of gaps suddenly appear out of nowhere, and then you misreported the news. So I think it is very it is down to the journalists themselves, and I mean like there's nothing stopping journalists from being able to do that. I mean, we are trained to write the news on time. We are trained to. It's just the dissemination of how do you do your work.
Thank you, Ratsi. You know, we look at media as the fourth estate. It plays such a critical role in terms of how information is channeled to the large audience. And you know, Malaysia, we talk about 30 million population, but this population is spread out between Peninsula, you know, East Malaysia. We have urban audience, we've got rural audience, all of them relying on different forms of media for news. You know, and that news is critical in, you know, the public being able to make the necessary decisions and hold the government accountable, as mentioned by His Excellency earlier. In that case now, Madiha, I just want to talk to you about existing mechanisms and how these mechanisms could really adhere to international standards, especially as we have Article 10 of the Federal Constitution, and as what you know, Mastera, you know, in reading out the minister's statement earlier, Article 10 cannot be read in isolation of the restrictions contained therein. And these restrictions are often with regards to, you know, national security imperative and other issues, right? On the other hand, we have very strong international standards promoting freedom of expression and as well as media freedom, right? How do we align this and what is really necessary in Malaysia in promoting such a mechanism?
I think that's an excellent question. And I think the first thing we need to think about is how do we get that openness of even adhering to or referring to international standards? And I think that's constantly evolving, breaking through the traditional practices, breaking through the cultural barriers of things that we would not have imagined having to talk about or allowing now. A simplest example is, I think, a decade ago, it would have been, no, maybe a decade or so, it would have been very rare for us to have seen a leader from an opposition party getting any airtime on national broadcast channels, but now we do. About a decade ago, the idea of debate was considered not our culture. You know, debat itu bukan adat kita. But now we see the very people who used to think that are also involving themselves in debates, live, unscripted. And we have people who actually want to watch it, and we have other leaders who are actually thirsting for such a platform. So these things evolve, these things change. And it's because of these changes on the ground that I think can spur the changes in legislation. Because as you know, changing the law, like changing the CMA, it needs to go through Dewan Rakyat, Dewan Negara, so it has to have this buy-in from everyone as well. For our side on the Content Forum, our main aim has always been to make sure that the best practices that we include in the Content Code is referred to in international best practices as well. But again, we need to think about the fact that there is no one-all, be-all standard that's the best out there. We've got freedom of expression in the United States makes it sort of impossible for them to regulate hate speech, because any attempt to do that is like a violation of their First Amendment. But we have other countries who talk about hate speech, basing it on religion, on race, on LGBT, on other communities, and we need to look at these standards across the globe and see what exactly is optimum for our country right here, right now, how to future-proof it in the future so that it continues to be relevant and dynamic, And again, I believe that it's all about being open to the idea and having dialogues about it and making sure that there is no mental block against it. So there's not just political will, but also public understanding that this is something that we need to do in order to make sure that our country continues to thrive on the global platform.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Madiha. I think in that context, we do need to break this bubble, or which is the culture of secrecy here in Malaysia, and really push forward towards a more progressive information regime. And we are glad that we have the Minister of Parliament and Law who will be delivering the closing speech today, because that his department, the Bahagian Hal Ehwal Undang-Undang, or the Legal Affairs Division, is actually committed towards working on a new legislation on right to information. I think that is really critical in promoting media freedom as well here in Malaysia. Taking the conversation forward, Puan Mastura, you shared some very critical measures that the government's putting in place to ensure that there is better information integrity as well as media freedom. One other follow-up question on that, I think, public, especially during the pandemic, we relied quite heavily in terms of the press conferences of the various ministers. We also actually relied on sebenarnya.my in determining the veracity or reliability of information. What do you think the public could do in terms of, or rather what the government could do to ensure that we are able to build better trust in terms of the mechanisms that the government already has, so that the public could also access or leverage on things like sebenarnya.my?
Okay. Thank you, Wasala. I think as expected, a committee was set up. Actually, we have set up a committee to help different government agencies to work together to deal with fake news online. So at the moment, actually all ministries and related agencies are involved in finding and keeping an eye on the spread of false information and fake news that has to do with things that fall under their purview. And they are also actually responsible to verify all social media channels to get official messages and information out to the public. So they have to be to ensure that public statement that explain, clear up or refute all false information or fake news that is spreading are taken care of in their own individual social media, and we will actually amplify their in the ministry. Now we are actually rebranding ourselves. We are now not KKMM, we are KCOM, Kementerian Komunikasi and Multimedia Malaysia. So the responsibility of our ministry is actually to amplify those explanation using the different platform that the ministry have. On the sebenarnya.my is actually a fact-checking website run by the MCMC, and it's actually created with the goal of teaching people how to think critically and share responsibility. It is also a single place where the public can check information and news that has a big effect on the country's economy and security. Actually, empowerment is the key part of success in sebenarnya.my. Actually, people are allowed to take part in the process by sharing any suspicious or untrue news through a section of the portal called Channel to Us. So, it is not only providing facts or correction on what the government identified, but the public also can actually forward it to that sebenar.my so that government can actually provide the corrections or the real story of any untrue news. From the tip-offs, our dedicated team at sebenarnya at MY will send the unconfirmed news to the appropriate agencies to check for accuracy and point out if it turned out to be false information and fake news. So based on the number of visitors and the amount of information shared by the public from sebenarnya.my sources, the portal has shown itself to be effective at making people more aware of fact-checking. So since the setup in March 2017, the portal has had more than 294 million hits. So on average, it gets 4.8 million hits a month. And in addition, actually, we receive 14,000 tips-off from the public about news or information that seems suspicious but hasn't been checked. So it shows that people actually more aware on how dangerous misinformation and disinformation can be. So with this kind of awareness actually can help government to stop the spread of false information and fake news. We also have, actually the National News Organisation has also established an independent third-party fact-checker in Malaysia through MyCheck Malaysia. MyCheck Malaysia has a similar goal as sebenarnya.my, but with a different concept. It is run by media professionals and journalists who are editorially independent and get their information from variety of sources. As previously mentioned, actually we are also working with the people who run social media sites to stop the spread of fake news. Social media providers and platforms have been asked to help mitigate fake accounts and false news that could cause harm or violence, and to take away the economic incentive that drive people to spread false information. We know that some bloggers and bloggers actually making money out of creating content. And social media platform also are working with independent third-party fact checkers if a story is false, where they will remove and put it lower in the news feed. Through the MCMC also, the ministry has undertaken a number of awareness campaigns across the country to help people get into the habit of checking facts and become more fact literate and vigilant to stop the spread of fake news. The initiative actually we call Klik Dengan Bijak. It is slogan, and also we spread the slogan of tidak pasti jangan kongsi, which roughly means not sure, don't share. So the goal is to teach internet users to be more responsible by not sharing content and information that hasn't been checked. And we want them to be more aware that what they read or see online in order be more aware of what they are reading online lah, so that they won't be cheated or be the one who actually spreading fake news. So what we want now is actually cooperations from the public to actually fight fake news, misinformation and disinformation.
Yes. Thank you, Puan Mastura. I think key to this is definitely public awareness and media literacy. I think we need a growing society that is thinking and able to discern between real, fake, and other malinformation before us. Before we segue into the next part, basically, Christine, do we have any questions from our virtual audience? Thank you very much, Christine, and also to our virtual audience. This question would be also covered and addressed in the second panel after this. But perhaps, Radzi, you can talk a little bit about how basically the traditional, or as what a professor from Nottingham University, Malaysia says, the legacy media. How is the legacy media moving forward in terms of embracing this digital spaces and as well as creating news or content or spaces for intergenerational engagement?
Thank you. So I think we can see a lot if you subscribe to the traditional, I mean like the old newspapers such as Malay Mail, New Straits Times, or even the rebranded Utusan now, all have their own Instagram channel, Twitter channel, and even Telegram, just to reach out for to the audience. And some of them already have their TikToks, which just mention briefly about the news and then share link so you can put it. I think they are playing to that. And then you have some really, really interesting, like I gave example of the Star who have this interactive, the Star Plus section with, and Malaysia Kini with their own their own take on to be interactive, and it is all being utilized towards this new platform sharing, cross-platform channels. And I think the traditional media, I think none of it still rely on newspaper anymore. Like the ambassador said before, our circulation has fell 90%. So yeah, it was during my timeline as a journalist. So I saw myself that including Malay Mail, who just say, okay, we need to play the digital game now, no longer the traditional media. So I think it is being done. It's just we need that loyalty from before from the readers who subscribe to their own newspaper.
Yeah, thank you, Radzi. I think it's critical for us to also understand and look at the fact that this, it's not just the distribution channels which has changed or the mediums which have changed, but actually even engagement with public or the readers have changed. It's no longer one way, channeling of news, but now with the comment sections and so on, there is better engagement and better feedback and responses that trickles into how media themselves play out in addressing these issues. Actually, I want to also segue into a very interesting commitment made by both the Prime Minister and the Minister of Communications and Multimedia at the recent Hari Wartawan National. Aside from the declaration which was adopted, the promise for media freedom, there was also a commitment or a proposal to establish the National Association of Journalists. Puan Mastura, perhaps you could shed a little bit more light in terms of what role do you envision such an association to take on in promoting media freedom in Malaysia as they continue to navigate the challenges of digital spaces?
Before that, Wasala, can I address the question by the virtual participant?
Yes, by all means.
Definitely, government encourage any initiative to create a special platform to disseminate information for the youth and the children. On our part, actually, as I mentioned just now, that our Jabatan Penerangan, RTM and Bernama have to actually adapt to technologies by having more information disseminated through social media, including TikTok, Reels, and we will make sure to create attractive infographic, because we know children and the youth, they are impatient to listen for 20 minutes news. They just want to see few seconds of information that they actually can understand the message and attracted to it. So definitely yes, we are going towards that. We try to adapt our methods and approach to address the youth and the children. On your question, okay. Actually, the government discovered that actually the journalists in Malaysia actually doesn't have a very strong institution that can actually fight for the journalists. I give you example. During the height of the pandemic COVID-19, the journalist was not categorized as frontliner. You don't get the first batch of the vaccine because nobody actually fight for you. The health officer, the medical practitioner, they have Kementerian Kesihatan to fight for them, to make sure everybody protected with vaccine. The army, they have this Ministry of Defense to do it. But for the journalists, it's very difficult. Our ministry may only try to fight for those that we employ in Bernama, RTM, and Jabatan Penerangan, but not the overall, because you are actually an independent individuals. So that is an example why do we really need an organization that's strong enough actually to fight for the interests of the journalists. And actually we learned this from Indonesia. We have this organization, what we call ISWAMI, that is the link that we have with Indonesia, and we can see that Indonesia have a very strong press association. Even the Hari Pers in Indonesia, that actually every year that they have this huge event, and it is not actually organized by the government. While in Malaysia, we have to rely on Bernama to organize the Hari Wartawan Nasional, and because of that the limitation that we have, it's actually very difficult to have this event annually. But we are trying our best to make sure we have it every year on the 29th of May. To actually show our recognition by the government to all the journalists. So that is what actually behind the proposal to actually we actually want all the journalists, all the penggiat kewartawanan, pengamal media to come together and come up with this association. And actually it will be better for the interaction between the government, especially when we want to address any issues pertaining to journalists, especially in line with today's theme, that is freedom of speech.
Thank you very much. And I'm really glad to hear that the ministry has heard the call of several organizations since last year, or 2020 really, in ensuring that media is considered, or journalists are considered as frontliners. And I think there's also a call especially to set up a media resilient fund proposed by GERAM, National Union of Journalists, as well as CIJ when we handed over a memorandum to the previous minister last year. Actually, it's very interesting that you talked about our neighbor, Indonesia, and their commitment in bringing together different stakeholders. Indonesia, I mean, we look at Indonesia for quite a number of things. I think one very interesting thing that we look to them is their press council. We've also looked at other countries, including Timor-Leste, and how they've established their press council. The idea of press council or media council here in Malaysia is nothing new. And I think it came up in the 70s, way before I think half the people in this room were even born. Since then, there has been constant demand to establish a multi-stakeholder independent initiative that would self-regulate the media industry, taking away some of the burden from the government, right? But also creating incentives for the media so that they consider their own viability, but at the same time create their own standard, right? The Media Council idea then grew. We had the Pro-Tem Committee established in January 2020, and the Pro-Tem Committee completed its report and drafted the law and submitted it in August 2020. Yeah? Now, obviously, we look at such a mechanism as a mechanism that would set standards, right? And it's critical because it's also an opportunity to align all the existing standards. We have laws now to govern print media, laws to govern digital spaces, but there is very little harmonization of these laws and regulation. I think that needs to be looked at. This mechanism, Media Council, if established, would also, of course, provide a dispute resolution mechanism, which will be a clear interface between media and the public, including the government, to resolve ongoing issues around standards and so on, right? Now, in this space, Radzi, as being a member of the Pro-Tem Committee as well, how do you think a Media Council, or rather what role could a Media Council play in strengthening information integrity and media freedom in Malaysia?
Thank you, Wasla. First, I would like to address, because we are comparing ourselves to Indonesia. I mean, like the Iswami. Indonesia also have very diverse and rebellious media culture, especially against the government. Post Reformasi 1998, they have Aliansi Jurnalis Indonesia, which is some of them they are not part of the Iswami, sadly. Then they have the laws that protect press, Akta Press. So they actually have that law that protect the press from doing the job. As opposed to Malaysia, where I think this year we have like several journalists being called up by the police just for reporting, and there's nothing being done. The government didn't address the matter. And the role of the Media Council is for self-regulation. I mean, like, on the media understands how the media works, and then they have also must have stakeholders from all sides, from the government, from the public, just to ensure that the management of the information could be dealt with easily. Because I think one of our in one of our first meeting, I think we talk about. I think the most complaint we got is like some people will say we stealing photos from each other's media. I think that is something very serious and we taken about, but it's never been talked about between the government or the public. So the role of the Media Council is not just for the big stuff. It's also for the small delicate matter about the complaints that people they could complain. At least have a body to say, okay, we are not being represented by the news. We are the news reporting is vitally. So there's a body who can handle that kind of matter. Not only just for, I think, taking the power away from the government, it's actually to empower the media itself to be able to serve the people better, serve the democracy better, and to make sure that everyone is feel heard and represented.
Yeah, thank you, Radzi. Christine, do we have any more questions from the floor?
So this is, I think, a question for the ministry. So we know the ministry has been ramping up efforts to take down sites that has been spreading fake news. So the first question is on the definition of hate speech. What does the ministry define hate speech? Because sometimes the lines can be quite blurred. And is there plans to set up a committee or a council that is a platform for appeal for people whose sites have been taken down, such as the oversight board that has been set up by Meta and is bound by a group of very eminent people to decide whether to uphold or reverse the decision of Facebook to leave or take down a post. So yeah.
Okay, it's a tough question. What I can say is that is the reason why we are reviewing the Multimedia and Communication Act at this point of time, because the regulation is not that clear. The definitions of all the element of hatred, the element of pornography,
Okay,
the element, all those are very subjective. It's just generally defined in the Act. So that is what we are reviewing at the moment, as well as the element of at the moment we only reacting to a complaint or but from either the victim or the society. So it is not. It's very rare that it is the initiative of the government to take action. So. And to strengthen all this, that's why we need to actually have a more specific definitions and on what to do and what not to do, as well as the mechanism for appeal. But the society, the public should be aware that if it's involved platform by and owned by an international entity, for example Facebook, it is not simply instruction by the government. The decision to either to pull out or pull down the news is actually by the entity itself, meaning they are actually in agreement with the government that this is actually amounted to hatred that we will and such action will be done. So to say that government do it arbitrarily is wrong, and we are trying our best to be as fair as possible.
Yeah. Thank you. As we draw to a close, perhaps a final question. We are all seated here representing different stakeholders. Here, Razi representing media and journalists. We have Mediha Content Forum. We have a state representative. I'm technically representing the civil society. And in the room, of course, we also have the UN agencies being represented. And in all the discussion, obviously, we've heard different initiatives, different needs. How can we move forward, rather than being in a silo, but move forward collectively through multi-stakeholder engagement? And what's your idea in terms of a multi-stakeholder engagement as we navigate these digital challenges? I don't know who, Radzi, do you want to take it first? Quick one, yeah, Radzi, 1 minute, yeah.
So
your vision, yeah.
My vision is to have like a government that can hear the people's plea, media that could engage in both public and government openly and honestly, without fear or favor, and also the public who are empowered and have the ability to discern.
Yes.
So that's the ideal. But in this time, I think what we can do is that more engagement on the matter. I think a good media association is needed, because we used to have the National Union of Journalists, but it was not empowered. It wasn't representing most journalists anymore. But they are still one of the loudest, along with us, especially during the vaccine and when harassment report happens over to journalists. So I think right now we can sit down and we can continue to engage. I think we've been to several engagement with the ministry, with 3 ministers over the 3 years. So I think open and honest dialogue are important in moving forward.
Yeah, Mediha, perhaps your ideal here.
I echo Razi entirely. I think open and honest interactions are very, very necessary. I applaud the ministry's efforts to include everyone in the public consultation, perhaps for the CMA review. I hope you include us as well, because we do represent broadcasters, advertisers, and the lot. And I think the best way for us to do this is to have more of these dialogues as well, but not stop here once the cameras are off. Moving forward, the action to be taken is we need to continue these conversations offline and having it ongoing. That would be best.
Yeah, thank you. And for Mastura.
Okay, what I would say that I think the government now is more open for anybody to come forward, and we are willing to engage with anybody, everybody, And I think even our Yang Amat Berhormat Prime Minister is very media friendly. And he actually very, put journalists close to his heart, your interest. Definitely, we are willing to consider what best for the journalism and journalists. But I'm also back for the understanding from the journalists that as a government, we have various multiple stakeholders that we need to balance. We shouldn't appear as if we are siding with certain aspect of community, or and that is why it's been very difficult, and we need more time to actually address all the issues raised by the journalists.
Yeah, thank you very much. Putting on my CSO cap here as my final word, I think I completely agree and echo the need really to move forward. I think next year we shouldn't be talking about the challenges. Next year we should be exploring how these practices, measures being put in place is really enhancing our media freedom and strengthening information integrity here. We are moving ahead, exciting moments for us, especially with the upcoming elections. And as civil society organizations, I think we are looking for constructive engagement. We don't want to always be seen as this confrontational entity. We're actually representing the people, and I think it's critical for us to engage in different spaces, not just about standard setting spaces, but really about how do we bridge policies to the reality on the ground. And that is critical as we move forward in navigating the threats before us. And it's not just going to be the digital threats. That's going to be an overwhelming amount of threats. But I think by working together collectively, moving towards one ideal, which is media freedom, freedom of expression, it's critical for us as Malaysia, as a nation moving forward. On that note, I would actually like to thank all our speakers today, Radzi Raza, Madiha, Puan Mastura. Thank you for being with us. And thank you again to all the organizers. I'm handing it over to Christine. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Washla, and our panelists. So, ladies and gentlemen, we will now take a short break before we come back for our second session. So, it will be 5 minutes. So, please stay with us, and we will see you shortly. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the World Press Freedom Day Virtual Forum 2022. So we will now begin the second panel discussion with our lineup of amazing speakers who will discuss on the topic Fast and the Factual, Adapting to a Changing Audience. The floor is yours, Ms. Washla.
Christine, and welcome back to all our audience, both in present here as well as our virtual audience. For those who are just joining us for this session, the previous panel had different representatives or stakeholders representing different spaces, including state, content forum, broadcasting and advertisers, media group, as well as civil society organization in a bit. Moving the conversation forward, what we are attempting to do in session one is locate the discussion within the perspective of media themselves. And it's really critical because as we are talking about the challenges experienced by media, it's always very interesting and to hear from media in terms of the innovative ways or measures that's been taken in addressing the continuing threats and now more so within the digital spaces. We have today with us representatives representing diverse mediums. Also, we have one panelist, speaker, who's joining us virtually, representing East Malaysia as well. Yep. On that note, I would actually like to introduce our speakers today. We have with us Ashwat, who is an award-winning news anchor and journalist in 2010. I'm bringing that up first, Ashwat, who is Ashwat Ismail, who's the head and editor-in-chief of Astro Awani. What I didn't know, and this is the first time I'm hearing it, is the fact that Ashwat was also the co-founding member of Astro Awani.
Oh, I was the youngest journalist.
Yeah, and one of the youngest journalists back in 2007. Ashwat currently holds the position as head editor-in-chief, is basically responsible in overseeing the entire operations by providing content, editorial and digital strategies, and newsroom leadership development in taking forward the business operations of Astro Awani as well. Yeah. Next we have with us Tan Lee Chin, who is the Group Chief Operating Officer of Media Chinese International Limited Malaysia. Lee Chin started her career, journalism career, with Sinchu Daily in 2008. We didn't know that she was also a legal professional. And she's now tasked with heading the digital team, or rather she was tasked in 2011 to head the digital team, and then being appointed as the chief editor of Sinchu.i.com. Now she is responsible in terms of not just spearheading, but also developing social media and video strategies for the newspaper. And I think Sinchu, as the current Group Chief Operating Officer, not just is responsible for growing digital audience and revenue, but I think it's also an inspiration for many women, young journalists, in terms of how she's grown within the industry itself. Yeah, and of course we have Zikri Kamarul Zaman, who really I think also similar to all the others does not need much introduction. Zikri is the assistant news editor with Malaysia Kini and the social media supervisor. He's been in the industry for 12 years. Yeah. Our online or virtual speaker today, Mr. Leonard Alaza, who is the Deputy Chief Editor of Asia Times Pulse and Borneo Pulse, who's here today not just representing the Borneo or the East Malaysia voice, but also as a journalist with 30 over years of, or nearly 30 years of experience. He's worked for the Borneo Post, the New Sabah Times, and Daily Express. He is now currently the Deputy Chief Editor of Asia Times, and also the co-founder of Borneo Pulse, which is an online conservation and sustainable development news portal, which is Sabah-based. I think it's critical to have that insight and perspective as well. And of course, Leonard is also a human rights activist promoting the rights of indigenous peoples. Yeah, but this esteemed panel is really exciting on how to take forward the conversation with regard to, navigating, battling, moving forward within our digital spaces. And I think the first question to Ashwat, literally bridging session 1 and session 2, really, can you share with us how can media really cope with regards to the threats to privacy, disinformation, and especially with how digital technologies and practices have impacted media, data retention, artificial intelligence, spyware, arbitrary surveillance. So how can really media cope with this? What are some of the good practices here?
Well, thank you for having me here. Indeed, it is a pleasure to be here and have this kind of dialogue. And most importantly, well, the world is more wired than ever, right? So that's the fundamental that we have to understand. At the same time, most important is the mindset. We must also understand, being a media practitioner, being a journalist ourselves, that the privacy mindset must be there. At the same time, we look into the fundamental of a digital space. Of course, like journalism and social policy, we have our own dilemma, in fact, trilemma. And I think we are facing that kind of trilemma somehow that reflects the challenges that we are facing currently. For example, like, the trilemma of access, rights, and at the same time security. So stuff like that somehow reflects our own current challenges as a media practitioner at the same time. Above all, it goes back to the fundamental, the economic decision, the business. How are we going to survive in this challenging and most wired than ever world, right? So it goes back to the question. We journalists, we media practitioners, and we are also business content leader, to strike that balance. Is there any specific one-size-fits-all kind of method here? The answer is no. So the agility and also the ability to adapt is always the fundamental of our day-to-day ops, or just to be a bit of transactional in our ops. So we have to understand that, okay, this is just experimental, and it can be wrong in another 3 months, for example. Like how AI works or algorithm works. Today, the algorithm tells us that, 3 minutes, then you make this much amount of money, programmatic. But in another next 3 months, it will somehow change. So there's no one-size-fits-all, and no one have a clear, definitive answer to how can we adapt in the digital space. But that's the beauty of digital space. And I would love to remain optimistic somehow, to look into the future, and the future of press, the future of media, and also looking forward in terms of making a lot more impact in terms of, first is nation building, secondly look into the global citizen at large. How can we improve our well-being? And most important, everyone can engage with each other and leverage on the connectivity and access to the information. And most importantly, it goes back to the fundamental of peace of mind.
Thank you, Ashwat. No, there is no one answer. But I think what is really important, what you've laid out really clearly is, on one hand, our expectation of media is very high.
Right.
Yeah, as the Fort as state, we are relying on media in terms of credible article and responsible reporting. On the other hand, media is basically made up of business entities, where the profit prerogative is also very high, purely in terms of sustainability and economic viability. Yeah? Now, Lee Chin, you're in a very interesting position, right? Talking about vernacular media.
Yes.
And looking at the current model of Chinese media, both in print and digital spaces. I first got to know Lee Chin because of Pocket Times,
Yes.
more so than Sinchu, right? How do you actually balance, the transformation from print to digital spaces, while at the same time understanding the need to look at the geographical distances, the geographical divide, but also the intergenerational audience that you have, in, because being a vernacular media, you have a specific target, but at the same time, it's a wide target audience, right?
Yes.
How do you navigate these spaces?
Okay, I think at the outset, I really thank you very much for having me here. It's a very, very exciting topic to discuss, and I really think it's really timely for us to discuss about it, because some of the issues that has been raised, whether here, I think later, or previously in the previous session, are really some burning questions that we face as media practitioners. So it's really good that we can air this out a little bit. So I think back to your question, we are not only a vernacular media, we are also legacy, like what a lot of people know us for. And I would say that today, while we are facing a lot of threats, the Chinese media in Malaysia has a very special spot or role to play. It is not only like our journalistic mission to report current issues that matter to us, that matters to the community we serve, but we're also promoting culture, preserving some of the traditions that within the community. So this is the role that we have been playing, and there are a few challenges to it, of course. First, we have to be everywhere nowadays. We can't only rely on print. People know us as Singchu Daily or Singchu Jipo. It's the daily itself. We have to be on social media, Facebook. Every day they have something new, Every day we are developing new strategy. So last year it was TikTok, how we grow our TikTok account. And then, there's also some social media that might not be very familiar with the audience here. For instance, Weibo, WeChat, because we are also in that space. We are also on Xiaohongshu. It's Red, a very popular social media that's coming from China. So these are a lot of spaces that we're trying to tackle, a lot of different strategies. Because for all this platform, right, I think like just now we have rightly highlighted that there is no solution. There's no one solution to all. I cannot produce one set of content and then I just distribute it. Because it doesn't work that way. Media practitioners today will understand that it doesn't work that way. So these are the challenges that we face. But as we move along, I think what's very important is we constantly remind ourselves that we are a news media organization. What really differentiates us from the content creator out there? It's our ability or our professionalism to push forward content that is reliable. And it is also how we build this credibility. I would tell you that the past 10 years was a very, very steep learning curve for professional journalists. Not only we have to learn to adapt with the very chaotic information ecosystem that we are in, there are also constant ethical discussion that we need to conduct. Just on our WhatsApp group today, of our editor was like talking about, should we carry a piece of news that went viral on social media because someone tried to use very obscene images to promote her new businesses. So some said no, we shouldn't be, we cannot carry these images. But there are important issues because we have more and more creators out there who are not aware that their content could actually impact the community or even the public at large, so they need to be responsible as well. So by carrying this piece of news, I think this is the information that we have to push out. So I think what I want to highlight is we constantly discuss and debate within ourselves. Is this right? Should we do it? And I think these debates really make us better. And in this environment, what is really challenging is, it is challenging because it wants us to be better journalists. So I'm very optimistic as well. I hope that, after we survive all this, we could be better and we can serve our community better.
Thank you, Lee Chen. Talking about survival, I think Zikri, Malaysia Kinis have, you basically have an advantage, being in digital space way ahead of time, actually. And, since its inception and so on. So as a digital platform, first and foremost, right, how do you engage with readers on social media platform as well, right? And how do you see, again, the question about the impact of algorithm-based content curation on news production and as well as distribution, right? And how can we all deal with this as more and more media become digital, right?
So I'll speak generally, I think what Malaysia Kini does and what most other media do is not completely different in terms of how we engage our audience, right? We post up content on social media, of course. How, obviously, Facebook and on Twitter and on other channels, you'll have the same kind of content, but then you have different words, different captions. Maybe on Facebook, you'll focus more on video, which surprisingly has helped Awani a lot in the past 3 years, actually. Awani's social media has shot up a lot thanks to growing interest in watching video online on social media. But I think in terms of algorithm, that's the biggest mystery in the industry, all right? There is a huge lack of transparency regarding this. Pretty much we are at the whims of our robot overlords, I would like to say. There is a company once that tried to engage us. I told them this earlier. The company promise was that they were powered with AI, and if we engage with them, they would be able to catapult our reach multiple times over by using buzzwords like riding the wave, not being first and things like that. They quoted us $2,000 per month. I could hire 5 people for that. Okay, but we didn't go with them because we don't have that kind of money, despite what people say about us. But there was another Malaysian media company that did, and I can say that despite these claims of having an AI advantage and things like that, I do not see that this has paid off for the company. Right? I can see quite regularly, at least on Facebook, that in the top 10 for every 2 hours or so, or top 50, very rarely do you see this company pop up. All right? Despite it being an established company that's been there for quite a number of years and well known on the online space. So really, like what Ashok said, this is constantly evolving, right? If you go online, you look for it, you can find something from maybe 2016. That is no longer relevant, right? Facebook changes the algorithm quite constantly, and us as stakeholders, we're left in the dark. So I think there are some best practices. For example, like don't post every 2 minutes, for example, right? You don't want to spam your readers. Try to curate your content a bit better to target certain people. But the problem with the algorithm, I would say, is not only how it impacts us as media, but also how it impacts us as a society. I would like to, the City Binary case, right? A lot of people had this perception that the media did not cover it at all. Granted, a lot of media were not able to cover it themselves, but we all had, at the very least, had published the Bernama stories. Okay, God bless them. Bernama has the manpower to cover court cases much more than a lot of other media do. But so yeah, every day there will be articles posted about the City Binary case. All right, maybe it's just a bit late, but maybe because of the algorithm, because of a lack of interest, these posts did not gain traction on social media. And despite the postings being there, the public perceived that, the media was not covering it, the media was trying to cover up City Binary case. Whereas it's not true, it's there. So I believe, it may not be true, but I think that to some extent the algorithms that social media has, because it is a business, right? So they also want to create bubbles where these things go viral only in certain communities, only for certain audiences, whereas the other audiences are completely shielded from it. So that is a giant problem that is echo.
Thank you, Zikri. I think what you've raised is we need another panel just to talk about algorithm and AI echo chambers and filter bubbles. Yeah. Taking the conversation to East Malaysia at the moment, Leonard, I think what we have seen over the last few years, especially with the advance and increase in infrastructure, digital infrastructure and technology in East Malaysia, we've seen better and more effective internet penetration in East Malaysia. How then is media leveraging with regards to this penetration? Yeah. And just to add on to that question also, Leonard, when we talk about leveraging internet penetration, is that limited to just East Malaysian-based media, or are we also seeing better closing of gaps in terms of information or media based in Peninsula, moving on to East Malaysia and vice versa? On to you, Leonard. And we have Leonard here joining us from East Malaysia.
Okay, thank you for having me. For East Malaysia, as you know, I'm not sure what is the internet penetration right now, what's the coverage like, but I guess it is not as wide as we would like to. As you have seen previous reports about students having to climb trees to get access to internet to study. So that's our reality, and don't forget that Sabah is one of the poorest states in Malaysia, and 8 of the poorest districts in Malaysia are all in Sabah. So we are, in terms of digitalization, we are still behind. However, in terms of media leveraging, leveraging whatever access that we have, I think it's quite okay in the sense, the question about media organizations from Peninsula Malaysia. I think it's quite widely consumed, as well as our media organizations in Sabah. And for Sabah, we are probably, just now Malaysia, the speaker from Malaysia mentioned about AI and these things for their platform. We haven't even talked about it as far as I know. I used to work for Daily Express, and just a couple of years ago, we were exploring the idea of making use of social media and all sorts of digitalization channels that we can amplify or reach out to a wider audience. I'm not sure how that project has been so far. And right now, I'm in a new newspaper. We'll just take a brief introduction about Asia Times because it's very new. We're still very much print-based, which surprised many people actually, because most media, as you know, newspapers, they are struggling with costs and all, so they're moving into digital options, digital platforms. But here we are, going back to the past. So the owner probably has his reasons why. And because of that, we realized that it's very hard for us to sprint. So that's why we've decided to start On Your Pulse, which is our own initiative among ourselves, the reporting team here, to start On Your Pulse in order to reach a wider audience. But our content is different. Probably later, if I have the opportunity, I can explain why we are different. Why our contents are different. Again, back to that question again, leveraging the internet access and all. Our Sabah media organizations, yeah, they have their own digital platform, but again, we are still a bit behind as compared to those in Peninsula Malaysia, which I base this on because we are in various groups, political groups, social groups and all. So people share a lot of contents from organizations, from news organizations from Peninsula Malaysia, Malaysia Kini, Malay Mail, and all, Australia, just to name a few. And also, of course, our local local news media organizations, depending on the story. I hope that I answered that question.
Yeah, thank you, Leonard. Thank you for locating it in the priorities of Borneo. I want to take a question back to Ashwat.
Okay.
Okay, Ashwat. Gone were the days where we were, looking at Astro as purely entertainment providers.
Right.
Yeah. We've now moved on into looking at Astro also as critical news providers, political updates, issues around all the other emerging concerns and so on, right? How is Astro adapting to this change while still continuing to battle with the ongoing threats, including threats within digital spaces? I know, Asha, we don't want industry secrets, but it would be very interesting to see how Astro has continued to not just survive, but you've thrived, because I think Astro's revenue last year increased while the rest of the industry, or even Malaysians generally, were facing economic challenges. Astro profited quite, I think there was continued increase in the revenue. So what are you doing, Astro, here?
Well, overall, I think most important is our customer. So it's always about customer-centric, people-centric, and that's the most important part in our business. It's not just about profit-making, but at the end of the day, it's about what is the best for all Malaysians, for all of our audience, including ourselves, to strive in the next 5 to 10 years. So that's always been the fundamental of what we are doing on day-to-day basis. And speaking from the pillar of news, Astro Awani, we are still very young, we are still learning. Since our inception in 2007 until now, we have gone through our growing pains. Not to say a lot of things is a dark gloom, but it's interesting to see how we can actually tap into technology and harmonize it with the whole idea of what's best for the society. I could still remember, if I could share, I was the youngest journalist back then as part of the co-founding team of Astro Awani in 2007. Our biggest mission is to challenge the status quo. Is this the best that we can do, or we can do even better? So that's the question, right? And that's always been the case, even for me as a youngest journalist back then, and suddenly I had to jump in and become the anchor. And yeah, we challenge here and there all bits and pieces of every single thing that what we have seen for the past, since our independence in 1957, and until now. Okay, what's the best for us, and how far that we could reach, even go beyond. That's why our fundamental of what we do on day-to-day basis is the spirit of go beyond. That's and that second, customer-centric, people-centric, go beyond. And here we are, looking at the transition plus the growing pains. Today, as we speak, journalists somehow, even though we are the most trusted news brand in Malaysia, according to Digital Reuters Institute, but having said that, we are still facing the moment where we need to rebuild the trust. Trust is at stake. I just came back from World Economic Forum, so one of the sessions that I went into and discussed with the prominent speakers is that to rebuild trust, you have to go hyper-local. In order for us to go hyper-local, we need resources. Like I said, I second your opinion when it comes to Zikri and also Ichin. We need money, right? Yeah. But it's not just that. Because of technology, we can actually tap into, we can be hyper-local somehow that help us to understand even further. But most importantly is to engage, to have a constant engagement and dialogue, and start to know each other when you speak to each other, right? So that's how we rebuild the trust. That's how we have to rebuild the trust. That's what I'm scared about, because we are at this transition in this country whereby the distrust and discontent towards politicians now, we are at the verge of morph into the distrust towards the system. That's what I'm scared about. And good to see from the journalistic point of view, from the journalism realm of journalism in Malaysia, what happened during the Hari Wartawan National, or the National Press Day of Malaysia, 29th of May, I think for the first time in Malaysia, that the Prime Minister said that, even committed for the freedom of press. To me, that's progression. Well, it's open to debate. But again, at least something that, like today, before this, based on my experience, it's very hard to get government rep or representative to actually be part of this kind of topic. You know, journalism under digital siege and freedom of press, they will shy away then. But today, somehow, hence why I said, I would love to remain optimistic.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, that's the reality, because
Yeah.
you have to work with the media, yeah? And trust deficit is real, right? And it was very interesting, Lee Chin, you talked about influences,
Yes.
both internal and external, are also influencing the type of medium. But I also want to talk about influences in a larger scale, because if we are looking at media diversity, it is really challenging here in Malaysia, right? As an organization that's really promoting community media to bridge the gap between, you know, legacy media, digital media, and so on, how do you see the issue of, you know, this large oligarchies, basically the ownership, you know, influencing the narratives and influencing readers to take certain position? I know it's a very somewhat controversial thing, but the reality is ownership influences content, right? How then, you know, one hand we are navigating algorithms, AI, but, you know, content is really influencing how public can think or should be thinking.
Yeah. Okay. If you look at it, how we compete in the media space today, or the whole information ecosystem, even if we are a media conglomerate, some say, you know, we have a few titles publishing in a group, we compete against each other. Because I think more than ever, the audience is really at the stage, at the center of our discussion, of our strategy, of how we move on. They really dictate, or, you know, we want to know what they want, and we want to push the issues that they want to know more, or, you know, while realizing our roles, or, you know, on the other hand, making money as a commercial entity. So I think I wouldn't say that the question that you raised is not real, but the reality is we are pushing towards where a lot of agendas are really very much driven by our audience. Whichever platform that we are at, whatever discussion that we have. And that is how, as a news media organization, if you want to stay relevant, you have to be there. So it is sort of like a progress, and it's sort of like I would say it's a very good progress in a way. So, like for instance, in Singchu, we know that, you know, we need to serve our community. So during the pandemic or the infodemic, you know, there are lots of questions in our inboxes asking us, is this hoax? Is this real? Is the government going to implement this? You cannot imagine the numbers in our Facebook inbox, in our Twitter, direct message, and everywhere. And like, then we will have to step up, and we have to train our journalists to do all these verifications, to tell, you know, to be the authority that tell them that, hey, this is real or this is not. And then, so we have to be very proactive in doing debunking or verification or fact check, you say. It's making us better. So again, back to the question, like, you know, how this is driving all our agenda as a news media. I see there's a progression, and I see that, you know, we are also moving into cutting the ties or reclaiming the connection with our audience. A lot of people know that there are people producing news content, but who's paying for it? For the longest time ever, it's the advertiser paying for it. Right. And that model for us now, it's not working. It's not working. So we feel the pain because, you know, our journalists cannot be paid. We have to cut. So you listen to people saying that we don't have, our journalists today have to do cover a lot of bits. That is a real pain that we're facing. We're losing our talent to like people like social media creator companies. Trust me, I have like 10 young journalists leaving me from January onwards. How am I going to arrest that or address that issue? So these are a lot of issues that push us to look into and also like to connect, really connect with our audience. They detect the agenda, like more so than ever. So that's how I look at it.
Yeah, thank you. It's so interesting, Lichin, because where is the connection?
Yeah.
You know, who is influencing the business model of media at this point in time? Now back to you, Zikri. Talking about business model, again, you know, while a lot of media is still catching up in terms of leveraging digital spaces, Malaysia Kini has continued to thrive, right? At the same time, as what Lichin pointed out, there's definitely a deficit in advertising revenues. You know, there is also you know, challenges of news aggregation, right? Different you know, internet providers are aggregating news at a fingertip click. You get information, right? Now, obviously, we all need to rethink the business model of media, right? What are some secrets you can share from your end here on how Malaysia Kini basically have continued to adapt, right? But continue to build on its economic viability by being creative?
So, what I can share right now is, as I think it's quite publicly known that a sizable amount of our revenue comes from subscription, of course. That's our primary, that's one of the main sources of income. And secondly, of course, it's advertising, right? So, as you can see, the Star, I think 2 or 3 years ago, moved to subscription. So that's one thing I think that, I think a lot more media is going to go towards that direction, towards the future, right? You can see that happening in the US, the UK. There are a lot more subscription model media these days. But, you know, you can't, unless you have, you know, traffic like the New York Times, you're going to struggle, right? You will still need advertising, right? The problem is, where do you get the money from, right? So of course, you know, you have advertisers who deal with you directly. There's Google Ads. Google Ads pay quite poorly, I would say. The best paymaster in Malaysia actually is Facebook. Facebook pays the most ads per click, if I'm not mistaken. And I think for a lot of ad revenue these days is coming through social media, it's coming through Facebook. Not just through ads, but also ads in videos and things like that. That said, I think that eventually we will have to come to that place where Australia is, where you have to, you know, we have to engage with the social media, with Google, Facebook, Twitter, and ask them for a better deal. Like, they're making a lot of money of us, and we're making peanuts, right? So eventually, we all, as an industry, will have to come together to get to that point to ask them for, you know, basically shake down for our fair share.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, you know, news, of course, you know, for us, is not just about political news. Or media is not just about sports and entertainment. Yeah, and Leonard has very rightly reminded of the fact that, you know, we need to look at emerging issues as well. And, you know, especially with Borneo Pulse, looking at conservation news, looking at environment and its impact on public policies, public narrative. How then is the future of media in East Malaysia, Leonard, considering its very, very rich diversity, you know, ethnic diversity, language diversity, and cultural diversity? Can't hear Leonard.
Hello, yeah?
Yes, go on, Leonard, yes.
Okay, you mentioned about language diversity. In the past, recent past actually, all the local papers, they used to have a page on in native language, Kadatan Dusun. We have lost that actually. I guess it's also part of the changing society, I guess, where many of the present generations no longer speak their mother tongue, so we have lost that. We have tried with Asia Pulse to revive, but we don't have many writers they can write fluently in Bahasa. So anyway, back to the question. In terms of cultural diversity, our future for content creators, I think we will get more space because they will have a lot of stuff to even in using Bahasa Sabah. We have even experimented using Bahasa Sabah, the local the way we speak Malay, uh, which wasn't very well. We didn't gain traction. We were not that long enough to see the traction, but uh, again, I don't know. Really hard to say in terms of, for a media organization like us. That's why we ventured into Pulse because why we go into conservation, sustainable development, wildlife conservation because all these things are very much Sabah. We realize that looking at all the other papers, it's a noisy market. Everyone's chasing the same story. Sometimes you have a very much politic stories. We were thinking, how can we be different? So it comes back to the question of what matters to people. So it's still at the experimental stage right now. We're creating content on all sorts of things: nature, wildlife, community development, empowerment, and all these things. The only thing that if you go to our website is the stories are quite limited because we are short of staff. Again, it goes back to the question of economics because we don't have the revenue to get more people, to get more writers. So at the moment, we just do it based on what we have. But the goal is, I hope that will be in the future, is to be able to change the narrative against the Sabah, where more and more people will consume contents that really matter to Sabahans. Going back to just now I mentioned, we all know that Sabah is one of the poorest states, and we are growing actually economically, trying to even basically trying to survive as a state, and trying to be prosperous. So even some of our leaders are talking about it. What do we have in Sabah to be prosperous, to provide opportunities to people? So we're looking at resources that we have, and for us, we position as media, for Borneo Pulse, we position ourselves there as the news platform for all this, so that people will talk about this in groups. People talk about how plastic waste can be turned into an income opportunity. How uh, those kind of things. So these are the things that we hope in the future will matter more so than actually who will be the next PM, who will be the next government. More so than that, because at the end of the day, since we are considered one of the poorest states in Malaysia, we are on a bread and butter mode. So we hope to be able to uh, to be the mouthpiece for this. And what is it for us? How can we move forward? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Leonard. I think what's important is we sometimes create our own bubbles, right, in terms of how we prioritize news, what would interest the audience, and so on. But there is a need to obviously break beyond this bubble or the silos that we work on. And the recent development, Ashfaq, you mentioned the Hariwat Tawan National.
Yeah.
That's, I think, the latest for us in terms of looking at the media industry, right? We got the commitment both from the media as well as the state in promoting media freedom. Could you just tell us a little bit more about the Malacca Declaration and how that is now one of the stepping stones in taking forward all the initiative in terms of creating the safe and enabling environment for media?
Okay, I guess before I go deeper into that and expand further, I think I would like to touch a bit on what Leonard has said. I mean, that's the future of media, in fact, across the globe. I keep on telling the team as well as my peers and also the future journalists who are now, somewhere in a higher institution, that I'm not going to hire them directly, but we're going to partner with them. So when media is becoming more and more niche in that sense, what Leonard's focusing on specifically on the conservation-related content, and that particular pillar need somehow an echo chambers as well as a right amplification arm. We are small as well. Malaysia Kini and Astro Awani are about the same size in terms of resources. I kid you not, even though we are 24/7. And this is the best part. So we need to partner with, and we've tried with this model, and one startup, media startup, this is just 1 year old, doing very decent, focused content on business in Bahasa Malaysia. And I think so that we partner with them. So that's the first step by the partnership, and second step is to look deeper into how we can actually leverage on just the profit sharing and revenue sharing, but also in terms of what best to improve and to find the new growth area together. Okay, that's one. That's the future of media, I'm telling you straight away.
We will come back to that.
We'll come back to that.
Yeah.
Come back to that and debate about it, right? Even though, especially on the numbers, but the Malaysian Kini and Astro Awani, we have same. Okay, come back to that. Melaka Declaration, or Melaka Declaration, clearly on the freedom of press, we have to uphold the principle the media must be free. That's, to me, is business as usual since the day we were born in 2007, Astro Awani, because that is our biggest goal. We want to achieve where, strike that balance. And after a while, right, based on my short 15 years of experience, I grew up with Astro Awani, and we have that runs in our blood as our DNA. I would like to bring this discussion one step higher. Freedom of press does not mean just about giving the space for dissenting voices. Freedom of press also, from my point of view, the access to the public data, and straightway to understand what are we going to face in the next 10 years. Public data now, okay, now we have another discussion where is that right to really tap into the public data? And now at the global scale, we are talking about creating a digital standard, all right? And of course, it's debatable in terms of what is the best so-called one-size-fits-all digital standard. I kid you not, there's no such thing as one-size-fits-all. So it depends on the maturity of the society to look on what is the best standard. But at least we have quite a scaffolding on what is right in terms of regulations, and also the safe space for the public to share in terms of the data. Because we need to learn with technology, we can actually predict what's going to happen to us in the next 8 to 10 years. We are going to be an aging nation, and indeed, I'm quite optimistic saying that maybe we're going to face our silver society or our silver community. Then later on, quite a tech and digital savvy. Journalism will remain. So that's our the business somehow talking about the viability and the feasibility of our business as a content provider. Yes, you're going to make money still. Question here: what is the best partnership model with the rest of the players? Best talk about the Melaka Declaration is clearly as the right can catapult about the media freedom. Yes, but how can we improve further from here? Not just about giving the dissenting voices, because we always covered both sides of the coin, and now we have what, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 sides. So it's normal, but the point of the nerve center of conversation and dialogue, that's the most important part. to know each other, in Malay, kalau tak kenal maka tak cinta. If you don't know each other, how can we fall in love with each other, right? So that's the principle that why one of our dialogue called Dialogue Tiga Penjuru, we want people to speak to each other. We want people to debate within that particular space, within that parameter. So with that Melaka Deklarasi or Melaka Declaration, now we can hold the government. So, okay, excuse me, we have the declaration. The Prime Minister already said that we have to be free in terms of content. And of course, within the space that freedom is not, in totality, we have our own constitution and our own principle of Rukun Negara. So we have these two that we can actually hold on and as the fundamental, as a guiding principle, so that we can move on better and build, well, better. Yeah.
I think if we look at this in a very, very, applying a very optimistic lens to it, I think it's beyond Tiga Penjuru now.
That's right.
It is about creating spaces for media as a business, looking at the role of the state, placing the interests of journalists there, so that it can respond to the need of the public. And if that's how we're moving forward, it's really a progressive way forward, I think, in taking forward the conversation. Key to that, of course, is again to break away the silos and make sure that it integrates the different voices and representation. Yeah, I saw Zikri smiling as you were speaking, Ashra. It brings us back to the question about really what is the role of media, because Malaysia Kini was set up as a space to provide alternate information, right, to break away the prevailing narrative at that time, right? And we are moving again towards upcoming elections, right? What then is the role of media, not just Malaysia Kini, but looking at media in Malaysia, in ensuring that the digital spaces are free of hate speech as much as possible, are free of disinformation, and what can the media do to both ethically, responsibly, in ensuring, that at least the bias is reduced, and there is effective response to gender equality in media, looking at how media can at times through news perpetrate certain perceptions of xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia. It's a huge burden on media, but what can media do in taking this forward?
I think, this is not an easy thing to answer, but really the role of the media in terms of not just elections, but all the things we spoke about is to educate the public, right? Is to give the public information to let them make informed decisions and for them to know better, right? So, for example, LGBT issues, like to understand people better. It's not really, the way I look at things is how do we make people look at things from a human perspective, right? How do you make people have empathy for others, right? When it comes to politics, of course, that's a bit harder. But I think in terms of reducing hate speech, using disinformation, what the media can do is, of course, call it out. If a politician says something that's clearly blatantly false, regardless of whose side they're on, you should call them out. If someone is saying something hateful, you should call them out on it. Of course, there will be massive pushback, right? Every time I would say that someone says something racist and you publish about it, there will be a debate. One side will say, "Oh no, this is not racist. I'm just saying something that's common and factual." The other side said, "No, this is clearly racist." Right? It's hard to reconcile that, especially these days. But I think that I would also like to be optimistic. That think that if you keep telling people to have empathy for others, that eventually I think at the base of it, most humans are good, all right? So we just have to tap into that to, and really just focus on educating the public.
Thank you, Zikri. Before we move on to the next couple of questions. Christine, do we have any questions from the audience?
Actually, there are a few, and I think it's pretty balanced between the three of them. So for Zikri, I think the question would be on Malaysia's Keynes. Since it started, it has been targeted at the middle class audience of Malaysia. Your news are very English-centric, and it appeals to them. So, and even reading from the comments, the audience seems very angry, that you have cultivated a very angry audience. So what are the plans to reach out to, especially like the B40, to the other groups that are actually supposed to be the targeted audience? As for Ms. Tan, so Sinchu, the Chinese community reads about news on China and Taiwan. What is Sinchu's stand on whether you are pro-Chinese or pro-Taiwan? Because there have been inconsistencies in the news that are being published. There are some are pro-China, some are pro-Taiwan. So how do you balance that, and what's the stand? Okay, so last one maybe for Ashwath. So Sinchu has their young journalism program, where 学习 on their young journalism. And Malaysia Kini in 2020 worked with ABIM, Project Komas and Project Dialogue to actually bring a bunch of school students from the Islamic school together with Chinese independent school and Indian-focused technical school together in an effort to promote national unity. So they have all these outreach programs for the youth, but what would be Astro's programs looking at you being a media conglomerate? So yeah, I think it's quite balanced.
Thank you.
I would love to hear from her.
I think,
Are you
maybe
pro-Taiwan? Are you pro-China?
Okay. But having said that, as you navigate the minefield, Lee Chen, the floor is yours.
I knew something is not right today.
No,
don't worry. I don't think we're pro-China or pro-Taiwan. We're pro-Malaysia.
Oh, that's a good
Good
one.
answer.
Okay, it's very important that when we look at international issues, we constantly, we are a Malaysia media, notwithstanding the language that we publish, okay? It's a Malaysian interest that we're carrying forward. I hope that will answer the question.
Brilliant way of sidestepping the minefield. Thank you, Lee Chen. Yeah, Zikri, do you want to take that?
So I want to correct some perceptions here. First of all, while Mr. Kini is perhaps mainly known for its English news, our largest audience is actually our Malay readers, right? Because it's free, all right? The Malay audience is significantly larger than our English audience. Regarding whether or not the anger, I don't think that is something that we try to cultivate, right? We try to not cultivate that, but it's hard to regulate how people react, right? We try to control that, of course, especially after our court case. But I mean, like, even then, we get a lot of pushback for that. It's like, why are you censoring me, right? I thought you were for free speech. Why is Mr. Kini censoring my free speech? And like, because it's against the law and we get in trouble for you because of you. But I think that in terms of targeting classes, I don't think it's something that's conscious, right? I don't think we write for a M40 audience. We try to write news that can be read by anyone and can resonate with anyone, right? I think, of course, maybe there is the barrier of our subscription model. There are things that we are looking at to perhaps widen our base, especially with younger people. But I don't think that we target classes specifically.
And let me help you, Zikri. Well, not just you're not creating an angry society, but the world is angry. So nothing to do with Malaysia Kini, nothing to do with Astrawani, okay? And but speaking of that, I would like to connect that question with what I've said, and also what Zikri and also Mr. Tan has said. We need to rebuild trust. In order for us to rebuild trust, it has to go even beyond journalism. We need to be more proactive in the sense of engage with the youth. And yes, Astro Awani in the next 2 to 3 months, but for sure before election, we're going to create so-called Youth and Emerging Leaders Assembly. And here I am talking about leaders today with the hashtag of Gerak Sekarang. And it haven't appeared yet, but I'm happy to share straight away that that's what we are trying to do, and to work closely not just within Malaysia, but we are working closely with young global shapers of WEF, and we are also going to reach out to Kofi Annan Foundation, and that's what we need to do. Not just about journalism or creating content, but also we want to connect our youth with the global youth so that we can speak to each other better and to reduce the anger and build trust towards each other. We have seen the good start of hashtag Kita Jaga Kita, and this is what we need. I'm talking about leaders, not leaders, the 222 in the Dewan Rakyat now. I'm talking about here we are having a burger owner who helped 2 kids or 2 staff that reports to him. That is leadership too at a hyper-local level. So let's rebuild that and focus on that and start to speak to each other, not just within the sphere of Malaysia, but also region of ASEAN, as well as internationally. And yeah, stop being angry. We can be angry at some point, but
not
until
constantly.
what point, right? Until what point do you feel angry? So stay focused, stay optimist. Yeah, let's do something at least.
Hold on, that's not the last bit.
Oh, okay.
As we are wrapping up, I think anger is important, but I think we need to channel it into constructive means and constructive ways forward. And I think one thing that the pandemic has taught us is that there are new cohorts emerging voices, right? And it's not just your 222 or the people in the government agencies. It's really people from the ground up. And youths as a cohort are shaping narratives, shaping agenda. All right. Now, in the minister's speech earlier, there was a mention about media needing to reinvent itself. Now, as media considers reinventing yourselves, how would you reimagine a new media? What is new media for you, and how are you moving forward? And I asked Leonard, perhaps you could take this first. We can't hear Leonard.
How about now? Okay. Right. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for the question. We thought about it also when we started Booming Pulse, Asia Trans Pulse, reinventing ourselves. It all comes down to, I think all of our media colleagues agree, it comes down to survival. How do we survive and still play our role as media practitioners in the future, probably different. So we have actually coined this. It's not new. It's entrepreneurial journalism. We have to wear entrepreneurial caps also. So while writing the stories, we are also part of it. So since we are involved very much into sustainable development, the SDGs and all, we have to work with the community. And we, again, until now, the question about where will our revenue come from all this, we don't know yet. But we have actually started small initiatives that will support the Borneo Pulse. One of the things that we have started is a woodworking workshop, actually. Anyways, it's funny. We have started a small woodworking workshop to address 2 issues. Number one is environmental pollution, where people burn, in Sabah there are villages, communities, and where the local authorities and garbage collection don't reach them. So we have a lot of wood waste. So we find this with community livelihood. So the wood waste that we have, we turn them into an opportunity for people who probably can, very good at carpentry. If they're not good, they can always go to YouTube. They can talk about digitalization. Go to YouTube and learn, and then get a little bit of skill and create something, and we have to sell. It's kind of like a social enterprise setup. So that's what we are right now. Again, we haven't even made any income from this, but it's still an experiment. But I think for now, that is our way to go, at least for us, and also to survive. But at the same time, not forgetting our role as a media organization where we amplify the the spirit of the Sustainable Development Goals. Because I think at the end of the day, that matters to a lot of people. We try to end poverty. Poverty is it's a real thing everywhere, especially including here. So we're looking at problems by providing solutions, and we see how all these things can. So as an entrepreneur, we can also survive in the business.
Thank you, Nana. Zikri, as we reimagine media, how do we reimagine media that aligns its critical role of being the fourth estate with the need to survive economically and to balance profit making? Where do we see ourselves going?
So I think, first of all, a lot of media are trying to figure out new social media, right, like TikTok. A lot of people think that means, you have to dance and do really weird things, but there are ways to do TikTok without, resorting to weird stunts. All right, and then of course there are people in marketing who think that, to target audiences that are youths or women, it just means that, let's talk to more young people or feature stories about young people or feature more women speakers and things like that. Of course, you do need that diversity, of course, but I think that's oversimplifying it. When you talk about content for youth or content for women or content for certain groups, it doesn't necessarily mean that they want to see more of themselves. You should find out what it is exactly that they want to know. So, for example, the youth like environmental stories, right? So you don't have to necessarily find a young environmentalist, right? Mm-hmm. You can find an environmentalist who is, aged or a veteran who has experience. And that is the youth content, right? So you should really, this kind of things require a lot of data, right? So to understand better, you need to understand your audience better. That's how you have to balance your role, delivering news, and also profitability, right? It's not just to say, let's have more youth, let's have more women, but it's also to understand what these audiences want from you.
Thank you. Michin.
Yes.
Malaysia, as you said, it's news for Malaysia, right? Media for Malaysia. Malaysia, however, is a diverse country. And often the prevailing rhetoric is race and religious based,
yes.
Right? How do we break this bubble, in reimagining media, including a vernacular media?
Okay, so we are already actively doing this because we understand that this environment or this ecosystem that we are in is so diversified, and it's a nice word to use, diversified. Sometimes they're very polarized. You're very, very surprised if you ask someone from another race what they know about the other race. They will know very, very little. So I think in the recent years we have created a lot of content, and we even make it into a section. We have dedicated resources to tell stories about different races, their relations. We wanted to highlight, it's called Kita. It's a section that we carry in Sinchu Daily. It comes out featuring stories. I think it's the niceties of our communities, all these things. And also sometimes it's to promote understanding and culture or religion differences. That is very important because they're not going to find all this different introduction of different races on social media because they live in their eco bubble. They have their own filter. They can't reach out to this, but when we publish in the language, or we amplify it through our different networks, we can produce different content. For these stories, we have our own TikTok videos, our own IG stories, and stuff like that. So this is how we constantly play our role as a media in this ecosystem. And then I think we are also working with different media. So we are working with Awani. Singchu is working with Awani, Sinar, and also like Star. So we're trying to create some sort of collaboration. Of course, part of it is the depleting resources that we face as news media organization. But again, these different people or this different organization will be able to bring different perspective. And on certain issues, what we see is like a mixture, or maybe like when it's presented, you can see, you know, how different races or how different communities in Malaysia are actually reacting, responding, or resonating, you know, how they relate to all of these issues. So I think this is something that we are constantly doing. It's not part of a reimagination. We will continue to do it. And I think what is very, very positive coming out of it is our audience really love it. These positive vibes is something that our audience really love it. And every time when I see all these stories being shared, it tells me something that's very positive about the nation. Yep.
Thank you. I also note that it's often food that seem to bind Malaysians, and you know, anytime, especially on social media, there's any criticism about Malaysian food, we can see the voices of Malaysia coming together, right? Actually, Ashwat, on that, I think as we reimagine media, you know, from your perspective, I think since you brought up the need to have a very, very progressive information regime, where we can access information and data from public information in a timely and accessible way, right? How do we then balance this as we move forward, given the very often restrictive spaces that we have, restricting laws that we have, which challenges our access to information?
Above all, what Zikri and Ms. Lichin have said, that's what we need. We have tried, and in fact, we love that collaboration. What we have learned within this journey, right? Unity doesn't mean uniformity. This is what we need to understand. Uniformity doesn't mean that, you know, unity doesn't mean that everything has to be in uniform. So you have to listen. Astro Awani's space is so limited. I need Sinchu's space. We need Malaysia Kini's space. So basically, this is why I said that the most important is the strategic partnership that will reflect good values in which will follow through with the good money. People love positivity. People love to be inspired. Advertisers love this kind of realm and ecosystem of positivity, right? So, to me, good values comes together. After that, good money and partnership. And let's build the capacity of the next future generation, like what Mr. Leonard has been doing. Such a noble job. Has been concentrating purely on conservation. We need to grow more youngsters to do exactly like that and create their own and be an entrepreneur. Content creator, you are your own media channel in which Astro Awani, Sinchu Daily, Malaysia Kini, everyone can work closely with, and let's share the wealth together so that the wealth is more common. So yeah, I think that's the way forward for media, in which we can strike that balance, not just being. It goes back to the fundamental where, you know, media is what is the role of media? To educate, to entertain, you know, and all of this, right? But most importantly is to inform, to educate, to entertain, and to inspire. So that's where the visibility of the business will remain. We future-proof ourselves with positivity, or rather than looking at the contestation of ideas and ideologies. It transcends that. With good values, it will transcend that. So that's what I believe in.
Yeah, thank you. I think Ashrat's very nicely brought this to a close with his now going to be very famous quote from Ashrat. Unity does not mean uniformity, because I think diversity is critical. Ashrat, one final note from my end is, as we ensure representation of all issues and voices, we do need to consider the need to locate voices, priorities, and issues of communities at risk who are often marginalized and vulnerable as well. Yeah? On that note, thank you very much to all our speakers. Leonard, thank you for calling in from Sabah. Zikri, Lichin, and Ashwat. Thank you very much also to the organizers.
Thank you.
And passing it back to Christine. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Washla, and our esteemed panelists. So ladies and gentlemen, before we close today's session, let us hear from the resident representative of the United Nations Development Programme in Malaysia, Singapore, and Brunei Darussalam, Mr. Niloy Banerjee.
What a session. Thank you. Thank you so much. So many insights. I wish I was with you guys rather than doing the closing remarks. Look, it's been fascinating to hear you and just learn and grow, and has opened up new neural channels in my head. Saying, okay, I haven't thought about what the new media landscape should look like. Unity in diversity. The UN should adopt that strapline. But look, thank you so much. My job is to say thanks, to also celebrate and recognize you and your great profession. As you can see, the UN is as old as I am, so it's still press freedom and not media freedom. We're still not, at least in our verbiage, we are not, we haven't gone beyond press. But there's something comforting about talking about the media like press, the old smell of a newspaper. That's right. Colleagues, thank you so much. I want to thank the two Excellency YBs for their ministry's support to this forum, and of course to the Netherlands Embassy, Excellency Art Jacobi, my dearest friend and colleague Karima, the resident coordinator, Mohammed from the UNESCO office, if you're online, and colleagues, all of you online indeed, those of you who have spoken, who have moderated, and who have participated. Members of the great fraternity we are celebrating today, members of the press and civil society, thank you for all that you do. It wasn't easy to hear some of the constraints that you're operating under, but we're in this together. You are important to us, you're important to the voice of the people, and you're important for keeping us on the straight and the narrow. So very, very happy that we could hear from you, and I heard optimism and despair, and in some measure, the despair was in small measure, the optimism was in good measure. So thanks very, very much. The UN is deeply committed to this idea. It's embedded in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And the idea of press freedom is not something that we take away, that we distinguish from the idea of human freedoms. So it's a little emotional for us as well. It's in our normative space as much as it is in others. Yes, the coming of new media has meant some tremendous advances, the democratization of knowledge, of news gathering, of information, and of vigilance. I think citizen vigilance, and I don't mean citizen meaning who got IC card, who haven't got, just the regular guy on the street. But also, it's also obviously caused much collateral damage. And some of the words you used here, I mean, fake news and all the rest of it, the debunking, I haven't heard that word for a long time. The veracity of news and building trust. And no, they're not angry. They're just, I think that was a mischaracterization. I think they're citizen activists. So, look, again, as I say, you guys are navigating complex times and complex waters, but everybody is. The environmental activist is, the UN is, we have an existential crisis, do we matter? One country goes and invades another. What are we, So, we'll get through this. I think the concept of alliance, the concept of coalitions, the concept of co-creating, and I keep saying this, as intelligent people, we should be able to get into a reflective space and say, look, let's figure this out. There must be tactics on how we can. So thank you again so much for that. We do, as a global organization that does command some moral authority, we are your allies in laying down a normative framework, if ever there should be one. Normative frameworks matter. They matter in the environmental space, for example. You saw the Paris Declaration and all the conversation about global warming, and then the pledges by various governments. The Declaration of Human Rights and Freedoms is also a normative framework. They don't always work. They're not enforceable in many cases, but they exist as a North Star to guide our general direction of travel. And I hope we can do something that's a rights-based normative standard for protection of journalists, veracity of news, debunking of fake news, and protecting the space for the media, including the Malacca Declaration and such other building blocks that we talked about. Clearly, the multi-stakeholder coalitions will be important. And I'm sorry you're losing your journalists trust me, in UNDP, I am also losing people. Sometimes to UNICEF, which I don't really. But yeah, I think we need to bring these new media companies on board. Obviously, there's differing degrees of sensitivity to some of these issues. But yeah, again, no dearth of room for dialogue and co-creation and coming to reasonable solutions. They won't be perfect by any sense of the term. So finally, just to say, you know, the issue of data privacy, which we have to, again, it's part of the trust conversation that you raised. Maybe there's something that we could all come together and do. Working with young people, please reach out to Karima or to me. The UN is putting out multiple forums on young people, so hopefully we can do something on that. Love the idea of sort of a franchise model of news gathering in the future, that you would not be employing them, you would be bringing them in as niche partners, feeding different channels. And so, yeah, many ways, again, if you just take all these gold veins, there's many takeaways from here. So then all that remains is to thank you to my dearest colleagues in the UN, so for putting this together, to the embassy, to the two YBs and their ministries, Ash, Hafiz, Christine, Juanita, and of course Karima, who's here. Let's keep talking, folks. Let's not now that we can move around and meet, probably have a coffee together or something. We can maybe, yeah, get together and do some fun and exciting things. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee. For today's closing address, our guest of honor will be Yang Berhormat Datuk Sri Dr. Haji Wan Junaidi, Tuanku Jaafar, Minister in the Prime Minister's Department, and over to you, Yang Berhormat Menteri.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good evening and salam keluarga Malaysia. Your Excellency, Mr. Art Jacobi, Ambassador of the Kingdom of the Netherlands in Malaysia. Madam Asseto Kelson, United Nations Resident Coordinator for Malaysia, Brunei, and Singapore. Madam Wasallah Naidu, Executive Director, Center for Independent Journalism. Panelists, moderator, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me here today to share my aspiration in conjunction with the 2022 World Press Freedom Day virtual forum entitled Journalism Under Digital Siege. I would like to congratulate the Embassy of the Kingdom of Netherlands, United Nations Country Team, ANTAC, and the Center for Independent Journalism, CIJ, for organizing this exceptional event. Ladies and gentlemen, we cannot deny nor avoid the importance and the impact the media has on our lives. It provides us with information, help us to keep abreast with what's going on in the rest of the world. It connects us with various groups of the society. It educates, persuades, and provides us with valuable ideas. And finally, my favorite is entertain us. The average number of hours we spend with the media is mind-boggling, although most of us don't keep track of it. The hours have increased drastically in the recent time due to the COVID-19 pandemic. For better or for worse, we are now inextricably linked to the media. The social media, to be exact. We are now living in a social media culture, and its influence is becoming very pervasive. Ladies and gentlemen, the press provides a platform for voices to be heard at all levels of the government, ranging from the national, regional, and local level. According to UNESCO, the United Nations agency tasked with fostering press freedom, the new digital business model, the development of surveillance technologies, transparencies of internet companies, largely scale data collection and retention pose risk of journalists and their sources. Media practitioners need to adapt to changes due to the demands of the internet revolution in the era of digitalization. This has also caused consumers to change their habit of getting the latest news, the real-time news, mostly uploaded 24 hours online. And as such, media practitioners need to adapt to these changes and find ways to tackle the onslaught of digital siege. While I'm intrigued and support the development in the media fraternity, I'm also perplexed at how the freedom of speech is arguably used to spread inaccurate and sometimes false information. I'm glad that in the today's age, internet citizen, or better known as netizen, and the new generation of influencers are given opportunity to exercise their freedom of speech and freedom of expression. However, I also believe that this freedom should be exercised responsibly by all quarters. Ladies and gentlemen, a free press is fundamental to democratic society. It seeks out and circulates news, information, ideas, comment, opinion, hold those in authority accountable. Freedom of expression is a universal human right and is enshrined in the Federal Constitution of Malaysia. As such, nobody, even politicians, have the right and powers to curb this fundamental right. Nevertheless, I personally believe that we need to not only ensure the right is not restricted but there should be responsible use of these rights. Those involved in the local news media industry have to be careful in what they report and strive to convey messages from any parties in the most accurate manner possible to ensure that the media ranking is not negatively influenced. You have to be more creative in terms of coming with the content of any news posted either in the print media or through social media platforms. Unfortunately, the Western media has been misusing their media privilege to influence the world by exaggerating and sometimes not reporting accurate information. For instance, in the case of Arab Spring, what actually happened in Iraq, what happened in Libya, what has been reported about the Palestine and recent war between Ukraine and Russia. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm saying this because I have been a victim of many misleading articles reported in media. They always like to put the word in my mouth, which has an adverse consequence. I will then be bombarded with so many leading questions as a result of the misleading and accurate information and news. I'll be left to damage control by clarifying and worse still defending myself on something I did not even say in the first place. Although no democracy has absolute freedom of speech, unless citizens have the right to express themselves in the political process, no government can be made accountable for its action. Each country places its own limitation on freedom of expression. What matters is that those limitations are not misused by political forces to limit public scrutiny, policies, and action that have an impact on the integrity of the government. Ladies and gentlemen, freedom of information and the right to access accurate information is vital. In this context, particularly our country, this will inevitably ensure that people can obtain accurate and current information and consequently reducing the spread of fake and false information and news. My ministry has been working closely with the Center of Independent Journalism to explore the possibility of a right to information legislation in Malaysia. I was informed the engagement session had been conducted at both federal and the state level to ensure that the policy decision is well-founded and can be presented to the government for a decision soon on this freedom of information. I'm very much support of this initiative and will facilitate a policy decision in due course. Ladies and gentlemen, we are the part of the democratic country where there must be check and balance on the government, and the media plays an important role in this. In the democratic setup, the press can be as a bridge between the government and the people. The role of media is important as a feedback, exposure, and conduit mechanism in all countries. Most citizens receive the information about what is going on in the government and how it affects them through the media. In order to push the boundaries of media freedom, all media practitioners must be truthful in their reporting and report news in the best possible manner. Freedom comes when the society becomes more mature. As such, all stakeholders have to be responsible. With this, it gives me great pleasure to wish everyone a happy Press Freedom Day 2022. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Berhormat Datuk Sri. So to our audience online, we have come to the end of the program today. On behalf of the United Nations, the Embassy of the Kingdom of the Netherlands, and the Center for Independent Journalism, I would like to extend our utmost gratitude for spending time with us today. We hope that you have gained valuable takeaways and insights from the discussion held, and we hope to see you again next year. Goodbye.